5:10. Along the way, they passed by the kingdom of Peach Branch but didn't visit the Ching Ching Manor. The girl in black was a bit unhappy, but after passing by the legendary Golden Crow Palace, her mood improved again. The girl's mood was like the clouds in the sky. On this day, at a small immortal ferry that was full of new things, they could finally take the ferry to the Spring Dew Garden. The journey was so smooth that it was exhausting. The girl in black stood in the big bamboo chest with her eyes wide open. She almost stared until her eyes were sore. Unfortunately, the two sides had agreed beforehand that when they arrived at the place where the cultivators gathered, she had to obediently stand in the chest and be a little mute. There was actually nothing in the big bamboo chest, only a broken sword that she had never seen him unsheath. She secretly kicked it a few times, but every time she wanted to squat down and unsheath it to take a look, that person would open his mouth and tell her not to do so. He even threatened her, saying that the sword had tolerated her for a long time and that if she continued to push her luck, he wouldn't care anymore. This made her sullen for a long time. At this moment, she raised a hand and hesitated for a long time, but still hit the back of that guy's head with a chestnut. Then, she began to hold the bamboo chest with both hands and deliberately dozed off, the type that was snoring. The scholar didn't care at first. He was busy bargaining with the shopkeeper in a shop to buy a set of ancient steely rubbings. Later, the girl thought it was quite fun. She rolled up her sleeves and hit the chestnuts. After the scholar in white walked out of the shop, he spent 10 pieces of snow to buy the set of 32 steely rubbings. Without turning his head, he asked, "Still not done?" The girl in black's arm froze in the air. Then, with a gentle movement, she patted the scholar's shoulder. "Okay, now you're spotless. You look more like a scholar now. Surnamed Chen, I really don't want to criticize you, but you're really a blockhead who doesn't understand romance at all. Alas, you stopped that ship on the river. There were so many noble women and girls looking at you as if they wanted to eat you. Why did you board the ship to drink tea and wine? It's not like they really eat you." Chen Pingan changed the topic and said, "You hit me 16 times. I'll record it in the account book. 1 piece of snow for each hit is money." The little girl crossed her arms in front of her chest and stood on her tiptoes in the middle of the bookcase. She sneered and said, "It's just a small amount of money. It's nothing." Chen Pingan boarded the ferry with her. Carrying a little spirit on his back was still a little eye-catching. However, most of the gazes were filled with contempt and mockery. Outside, cultivators who could use a mountain lord as a mount to cross mountains and rivers, or ride a flood dragon into the sea and overturn rivers and seas, were true heroes and true immortals. Chen Pingan thought it was pretty good. During the Guyu season, it was often sunny during the day and rainy at night. The rain gave birth to hundreds of valleys, and everything in the world was clean and bright. In fact, it was suitable for walking and enjoying the scenery along the way. It was just that Chen Pingan still hoped to be able to catch up with the tail end of the Spring Dew Garden gathering. His own packing house could not always idle around. The little girl in black was still unwilling to give up. "It's also good to go to the ship and drink some tea. I saw it clearly when I was on the shore. There were 2 young women in gorgeous dresses. Their looks were really not bad. It's a good thing to have a beautiful woman." Chen Pingan laughed softly and said, "If you were a man, I reckon that after staying at the Mute Lake for a long time, you would sooner or later be tempted and cause trouble. If I saw you at that time and the Qingqing mansion caught you to be a river lady or a maid to the Jinwu Palace, I wouldn't do anything. I would just clap and cheer from the side." The little girl in black was so angry that she punched the shoulder of this guy who spoke without thinking. "Nonsense, I'm a big water monster, but I never hurt people. I don't even care to scare people." Chen Pingan did not care. Another piece of snow to spend money. The little girl was about to punch the back of his head, but she did not expect that person to say, "If you hit the head, it's a small piece of snow money." The little girl weighed her own money. After taking out the grain rain money that was used to redeem her freedom, she did not have much left. No wonder those Jianghu people who passed by the Mute Lake often said that money was the courage of heroes. She frowned and thought, "Surnamed Chen, can you lend me a grain rain money? I'm tight on money right now and can't hit you much." Chen Pingan simply ignored her and asked, "Do you know why I wanted to buy a jar of pickled cabbage when I was in the county town?" The little girl was puzzled. How would I know what you're thinking? Did you finish the pickled cabbage on the way here? I didn't eat much either. You're so stingy. Every time I pick up a small piece, you look at me with your eyes. Chen Pingan laughed. I heard that pickled cabbage fish is very delicious. The little girl felt that she was really smart and understood immediately. She was about to cry as she squatted in the bamboo box and silently wiped her tears. She was smart and had a hard life. However, when they reached the room at the bottom of the ferry and the guy put down the bamboo box, she jumped away with her hands behind her back. With a look of disgust, she clicked her tongue and said, "Shabby." Chen Pingan took off his bamboo hat. There was tea on the table. It was said to be a local specialty of the ferry port, Rao village tea. He could not drink it anywhere else, so he poured a cup. After drinking it, there was almost no spiritual energy, but it was indeed sweet and refreshing. According to legend, before the ferry port was built, there was once a retired hermit who wanted to build a summer residence. He cut down the mountain and saw a small pond. At that time, the morning glow was like a veil and the water was especially refreshing. Brewing tea was the best, followed by brewing wine. Later, there were many people who came because of its reputation. Among them were cultivators who often sang poems with the literary giants. Only then did they realize that the pond was full of spiritual energy. However, they were all trapped near the small mountain, so there was an immortal ferry port. In fact, it was quite far from the sect of the owner of the ferry port. Chen Pingan began to walk with the sword furnace in his hands. The little girl sat on the chair and shook her legs. She said in a muffled voice, "I want to eat the tortoise jelly from the shop on the street corner of the ferry port. It's cold and bitter." At that time, I could only stand in the bamboo box and felt dizzy from the bumpy ride. I didn't taste the real flavor. It's all your fault for wandering around, looking here and there. You didn't buy many things and walked a lot. Chen Pingan turned a deaf ear. The little girl was actually bored and chatted casually. However, when the white-robed scholar began to walk back and forth again, she knew that she could only continue to be bored alone. She jumped off the chair and dragged it all the way to the window. She stood there and crossed her arms over her chest. The ferry ship had 2 floors. That guy was stingy and didn't want to live on the upper floor where the view was better. Therefore, outside this room, there were often people walking on the deck of the ship. There were also people by the railing in 2s and 3s, which annoyed her. There were so many people, but no one knew that she was the big water monster of Mute Lake. The ferry slowly rose into the sky. She was in a good mood as she swayed. She turned to the man and said, "It's ascending, it's ascending. Look, the shop at the ferry port has become smaller. The rice grains have become smaller." This was the first time in her life that she had taken the ferry port. She didn't know if the sea of clouds in the sky could be eaten. After staying at the bottom of Mute Lake for so many years, she had always wondered. The man only walked back and forth in the room. There were many people by the railing of the ferry. They were talking about many interesting things that happened recently. As long as they talked about Baoxiang Kingdom and Yellow Wind Valley, the little girl would immediately perk up her ears. She was especially attentive and didn't want to miss a word. Some people said that the yellow-robed old ancestor of Yellow Wind Valley had died, but he wasn't killed by the young martial uncle of the Golden Crow Palace Master. It seemed that the yellow-robed old ancestor was seriously injured because of this and was then subdued by a virtuous senior monk from Baoxiang Kingdom. However, for some reason, the old monk didn't admit to this and didn't reveal more. The little girl was so angry that she shook her head and scratched her head with both hands. If the white-robed scholar surnamed Chen didn't tell her not to speak carelessly to outsiders, she wouldn't have grinned so widely. She really wanted to shout outside the window, "That yellow-robed old ancestor was killed by the 2 of us." The little girl turned her head with grievance and lowered her voice, "I can show my true body and cut off a few kilograms of meat. You can use it to make spicy boiled fish. Then, can you let me talk to those people? I won't say that you killed the yellow-robed old ancestor. I'll just say that I'm the big water monster of Mute Lake and saw the big battle with my own eyes." The man was unreasonable. What's the hurry? In the future, when someone finishes writing a book about ghosts or landscapes, they'll naturally know. They can even say that you killed the yellow-robed old ancestor with 1 punch. The little girl thought for a while. Her eyes were still filled with resentment, but it seemed to make sense. Fortunately, the man still had some conscience. The room on the first floor of the ferry doesn't come with the Mountain Gazette. You can go and buy one. If there's one that hasn't been sold before, you can also buy it. However, if it's too expensive, then forget it. The little girl made a no sound. As long as she could walk a few more steps outside the ferry, it wouldn't be a loss. She jumped off the chair and untied the bag. She took out a bag that was shining brightly. The man had already flicked his sleeve and closed the window. He also threw out a tortoise camel talisman and stuck it on the window. The little girl didn't find it strange. She took out a handful of snow coins from the small bag. After thinking for a while, she took out a small coin from the bag. During this process, the inside of the bag jingled. In addition to the immortal coins, it was also filled with a mess of small objects. Just like the string of snow-white bells that she had given to someone in the past, they were all treasures that she had painstakingly accumulated over the years. Then, she put the bag back into the bag and casually placed it on the table. When she went out, she reminded him, "You have to be more experienced in Jianghu. Don't let a thief steal our belongings. Otherwise, you'll have to eat the northwest wind." Chen Pinggan laughed. "Oh, you're so generous today. You're even willing to pay for it yourself." When she reached the door, the little girl in black raised her eyebrows. She turned her head and said, "If you continue to talk about me in a roundabout way, we'll have to split the money for buying the newspaper." As expected, the man immediately shut up. The little girl in black sighed and said like an old man, "How can those fairies on the mountain like you when you're in Jianghu?" Chen Pinggan didn't stop walking. He laughed and said, "Old rules. No fooling around. Come back immediately after you buy the newspaper." After about the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the little girl pushed open the door and swaggered back. She slammed the stack of gazettes on the table. Then, when the person walked with his back facing her, she quickly grimaced. Then, her mouth moved slightly and she swallowed. When the person turned around to walk, she immediately crossed her arms and sat upright on the chair. Chen Pinggan stopped his stance and took out his folding fan. He sat at the table and glanced at her. "Did you buy it too expensive?" She sneered. "Am I that kind of idiot? There are so many precious newspapers on the mountain. The original price was 2 small coins, but I only spent 1 small coin. Who am I? I'm the big water monster of Mute Lake. I've seen businessmen who do business. When I haggle, I can make the other party cut their flesh with a knife. It's so heart-wrenching." Chen Pinggan felt a little helpless. He flipped through the court bulletins. Some of them were from the year before. According to the normal market price, the total price would indeed be a small sum of money. However, court bulletins were like seasonal vegetables and fruits. They were often expired and invalid. There were so many court bulletins, but they were actually not worth half a small sum of money. These were nothing. Business was business. As long as both parties were willing, there was no business in the world that only one could profit. But some things, since it wasn't business, shouldn't be so easy to negotiate. The little girl in front of him was actually very good. She was indeed one-track-minded and silly. But there were some things on her that couldn't be bought with money. Just like the young escort whose lips were cracked and bleeding, sitting on the back of the horse and handing over the water sack. Even if Chen Pinggan didn't take it, it could still quench his thirst. The little girl was bullied badly outside. She seemed to think that it was something outside. She staggered back to the door and hid at the end of the corridor. She squatted at the foot of the wall for a long time before she recovered. Then she walked into the room. She didn't think that there was a familiar sword immortal beside her. She had to do something. Maybe she thought that this was her Jianghu, one of the stories in the future books that he had accumulated in the Jianghu. Some of them had to be written in the book, but some of the embarrassing things didn't need to be written. Chen Pinggan leaned back on the chair and held a folding fan in his hand. He gently fanned the fan. "If it hurts, just yell. I'm not the scholar who helped you write the story. What are you afraid of?" The little girl in black's face fell. Her face was full of snot and tears. But she didn't forget to turn her head and swallow the blood in her mouth. Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "What exactly happened?" The little girl raised her hands and carelessly wiped her face. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "What's wrong? You're afraid to tell me. You felt that it wasn't easy to leave the bamboo chest and go out for a short trip. In the end, you stirred up trouble, so you won't have another chance in the future." In fact, she had never stirred up trouble in all the mountains and rivers they had traveled together. She only opened her eyes wide. She was full of curiosity and longing for the vast world outside of Yellow Wind Valley and Mute Lake. The little girl in black nodded gently. She looked sick. Chen Pinggan closed his folding fan and said with a smile, "Tell me about it. You've seen me make a fool of myself along the way. You should let me be happy, right? This is called reciprocating politeness." The little girl leaned on the table, her head tilted to the side. She stretched out a finger and gently wiped the table. There was no knot in her heart, no resentment, just some grain-sized worry. She said softly, "I don't want to talk about it. Sigh, it's not a big deal. I've seen a lot of life-or-death big water monsters. I've seen a lot of people die near Mute Lake, but I didn't dare to save them. The yellow-robed ancestor is very formidable. As long as I go out, I won't be able to save anyone. I'll also die. I can only secretly collect some of the corpses. Some of them will be moved away while crying. Some of them will just be left in the wind and sand. It's very pitiful. I'm not afraid of death. I'm just afraid that no one will remember me. There are so many people in the world, but no one knows me." Chen Pinggan leaned forward and gently hit the little girl's head with his folding fan. "If you don't talk about it, I won't listen to you even if you talk about it later." The little girl sat up straight and snorted. She shook her head left and right and smiled happily. "I won't talk about it, I won't talk about it." Then she saw the white-robed scholar tilting his head and pressing his folding fan against his head. He said with a smile, "Do you know that many times, for many people, their parents don't teach them, their teachers don't teach them, and their masters don't teach them. They should let the world teach them how to be human." The little girl started to frown again. She didn't understand what he was talking about. However, if she let him know that she didn't understand, it wouldn't be good. So should she pretend that she understood? However, pretending was a little difficult. Just like that time when the two of them accidentally entered the land of peach blossoms, he asked those mountain monsters in scholarly robes to recite a poem. Wasn't he completely at his wits' end? That person stood up. Without seeing him do anything, the talisman left the window and flew into his sleeve. The window even opened by itself. He stood by the window. The ferry was already above the sea of clouds. A cool breeze brushed past his face and his two snow-white sleeves fluttered. She was a little angry. So what if he was tall? She hesitated for a moment and stood on the chair. Suddenly, she thought of something. Wouldn't it show that she was more experienced and knowledgeable if she encountered some dangers in the Jianghu? I didn't know what they were laughing about, so I turned my head and smiled at them. Didn't you say before that no matter if you're walking on a mountain or at the foot of a mountain, or whether you're a human or a demon, you have to treat people politely? Then, that ferryman's friend happened to be leaving the house. At the door, he accidentally bumped into me. I lost my balance and the newspaper scattered all over the floor. I said it was fine and went to pick it up. That person stepped on me and even used the tip of his foot to pinch me. It shouldn't be an accident. I couldn't help but frown and grin. In the end, he sent me flying with a kick. However, that ferryman said that I was a guest after all. That fierce man ignored me. I picked up the newspaper and ran back. She crossed her arms and said with a serious expression, "I'm not lying to you." At that time, I couldn't take the pain and grin a little. She was afraid that the fellow wouldn't believe her, so she stretched out 2 fingers. "That's the most." That person turned his head and asked with a smile, "Do you think it's right to be kind to others all the time? Shouldn't it be split into 2? Be kind to the good and evil to the evil." However, even if the order and size of the evil people is clear, the punishment imposed on them, if there's an asymmetry, wouldn't it violate the order? When good and evil collide, the result is evil and evil, accumulating bit by bit. It's also like a mountain of dirt and wind and rain. However, it's a cold wind and evil rain. What should we do? The little girl scrunched up her face and silently told herself that she understood, but she was too lazy to speak. She didn't have enough energy to eat. That person smiled and gently tapped his chest with his folding fan. You don't have to think too much. I'm just asking myself. The little girl in black didn't want him to be like this, so she blamed herself. Compared to other people who were shrouded in fog and couldn't see clearly, she still preferred the him who planted rice in the fields and opened the mountain with his fists. Fortunately, that person suddenly smiled and jumped over the window, standing on the deck outside. Let's go and enjoy the scenery. Not only is there a foul atmosphere, but there are also magnificent mountains and rivers. He leaned on the window and stretched out a hand, joking, I'll pull you out. The little girl angrily said, Get out of the way, I can do it myself. She jumped out of the window, but she was afraid of ropes after being bitten by a snake. She timidly grabbed his sleeve, thinking that standing inside the box was quite good. She turned to look at the open window and softly said, We're poor, but at least we don't have to worry about food and clothing. If someone steals our belongings, wouldn't it be worse? I don't want to eat pickled fish, so don't think about it. But that person said, That depends on whether they have the life to hold on to the things they stole. She blinked and vigorously nodded, domineering. In the end, that person tapped her head with his folding fan, Don't be a bad student. She hugged her head and stepped on his foot. That person smiled, That's very good. In the end, she didn't dare to walk over the railing, but she was still carried by him and placed on the railing. Then, as she walked, she felt that she had a lot of face. A lot of people were looking at her. She lowered her head and looked. That guy was walking below languid, one hand waving the fan, the other hand raised high, just right to hold her small hand. She then said that she didn't need his protection and could walk on her own. She was very stable. At that moment, many cultivators and pure martial artists saw this strange scene on the ferry. A little girl in black walked with her arms swinging, her head raised and chest puffed out. At the railing under her feet, there was a scholar in white holding a folding fan, walking slowly with a smile on his face. The little girl casually asked, Surnamed Chen, once when I woke up in the middle of the night, I didn't see you by my side. Sigh, where did you go? Chen Pingan smiled, I was just walking around. I pretended that I was almost beaten to death, and then almost broke. It's nothing, just treat it as if I flipped a book and found a boring story. Halfway through, I felt sleepy, so I closed the book and talked about it later. The little girl frowned, You're so annoying when you only talk halfway. That guy smiled, We're traveling together, so we should be more tolerant. The little girl crossed her arms and walked on the railing, Then I want to eat tortoise jelly. One bowl isn't enough, I need 2 big bowls. I paid for the court bulletin, so you have to pay for the 2 bowls of tortoise jelly. That person nodded, Okay, but there has to be tortoise jelly for sale at the next ferry. The little girl frowned, If there's no tortoise jelly, I'll change it. As soon as she said that, she felt that she was really clever and had calculated everything. That person hesitated for a long time, something too expensive can't do. The little girl gently kicked him, I'm kicking you. That person also slowly tilted his head to dodge, and used his folding fan to slap her foot away, walk properly. Among the spectators, there were the ferry stewards and servants. There was also the man who was standing on the second floor and enjoying the scenery with his friends on the observation deck. He and 7 or 8 other people were like stars surrounding the moon, protecting a young man and woman. He lived next to the sky room on this ferry, and it was also expensive, so he didn't have to pay for a single snow. This was the benefit of having a relationship between the sect and the mountain. Calling friends, riding the wind on the mountain, training at the foot of the mountain, looking down on the noble plain, and looking down on the Jianghu. A young female cultivator with average looks but wearing a rare robe smiled, Has this little fish monster reached the cave realm? The young cultivator with a jade-like face beside her nodded, If I'm not wrong, he's just at the cave realm, and he's not familiar with riding the wind yet. If it wasn't for the protection of the fairies' formation, he would have fallen. It would have been fine if he was stepping on a river or lake, but if he was on a mountain on the shore, he would have died without a doubt. The man laughed softly. Young Master Wei, this little fish monster of unknown origin went to Steward Liu on the ferry to buy the court bulletin. He's a spendthrift, and spent a whole small sum of money. The handsome young man called Young Master Wei pretended to be surprised. He's so rich? The woman covered her mouth and laughed, looking at the young man beside her. Her eyes were full of affection, and everything was clear. The rest of the people laughed in agreement, as if they had heard an extremely knowledgeable saying. Helping others wasn't about observing people's expressions, and helping to turn the joy of a single person into joy of all. The young female cultivator asked again, Young Master Wei, that white-clothed scholar looks like the owner of that little dirty thing. Why doesn't he look like a chi refinement warrior of the middle 5 realms, but more like a crude martial artist? Young Master Wei laughed, and turned to look at the woman. You can't say this in front of my father, it'll embarrass him. He's now the #1 martial artist of our great Guan dynasty. The young female cultivator smiled apologetically. It's Qingqing's fault. Young Master Wei smiled helplessly. Qingqing, why are you being so polite? Are you treating me as an outsider? The young female cultivator called Qingqing immediately smiled like a flower. She came from Spring Dew Garden's night illumination cottage, and her father was one of the consecrators of Spring Dew Garden. Moreover, he was good at making money, and managed half of Spring Dew Garden's mountain range alone. In the eyes of the secular dynasties and emperors, he was a high and mighty Jindan Earth immortal. No matter where he went down the mountain, he would be a guest of honor in the mansions of rich families and immortal mountains. This time, she came down the mountain specially to invite this noble young master beside her to Spring Dew Garden to attend the finale of the gathering, the Spring Feast. There was a great Guan dynasty on the southeastern coast, and just the vassal barrier alone had 3 countries. The young master came from Iron Cliff Manor, one of the 3 most powerful clans in the dynasty. 4 generations, they used to be officials in the capital. Now, the head of the family, Wei Ying, gave up his pen and joined the army when he was young, and actually opened up a new life for the family. Now, he held military power in his hands, and was the mainstay of the largest border. His eldest son was an official in the imperial court, and was already an assistant minister. As for this young master Wei Bai, as the youngest son of great General Wei, he had been doted on since he was young. Moreover, he himself was an accomplished young genius in cultivation, and was extremely famous in the dynasty. There was even a beautiful story about how the nascent soul stage ancestor of Spring Dew Garden once went down the mountain for a rare trip. When he passed by Wei clan's Iron Cliff Manor, he saw the father and son being welcomed by the great Guan sect, and laughed when he saw the father and son. When outsiders introduced Wei Bai, who was the son of great General Wei Ying, but in less than 30 years, when outsiders saw the father and son, they would only say that Wei Ying was Wei Bai's father. Great General Wei Ying laughed heartily. He could not help but be carefree. After all, the founder of Spring Dew Garden did not praise people easily. Wei Bai was personally praised by a nascent soul stage ancestor, and his cultivation aptitude was recognized. This attracted the envy of countless people in the imperial court. Even His Majesty, the Emperor, bestowed an imperial edict and a secret treasure to Iron Cliff Manor, hoping that Wei Bai could continue to work hard, cultivate in peace, and become a pillar of the country early. She and Wei Bai were actually not really a match in terms of social status. When they first met, Iron Cliff Manor had the intention of matchmaking them. Great General Wei Ying said in front of her that they were a match made in heaven. However, at that time, the founder of Spring Dew Garden had not gone down the mountain to the great Guan dynasty. Her father was not very happy, and felt that Wei Bai, who had not reached the cave realm, had an unpredictable future. After all, after becoming a chi cultivator, the cave realm was the first big threshold. After that, Wei Bai's cultivation path was smooth sailing. He had the hope of breaking through the bottleneck of the cave realm at a young age, and he also received the undisguised favor of the founder of Spring Dew Garden. Iron Cliff Manor also rose in status in the Great Guan dynasty. In the end, it was her father who was anxious, and Iron Cliff Manor began to shirk away. Therefore, she went down the mountain this time. In fact, without her father's urging, she was very willing. She did not bring any retainers. In the coastal area of the East Sea, Although Spring Dew Garden was not the strongest, they had a wide range of friends. Everyone would give some face to the cultivators of Spring Dew Garden. For example, the young Grandmaster of the Golden Crow Palace would go alone every few years, and he would go to the secluded mountain range of Spring Dew Garden to fetch water and brew tea. However, Wei Bai had two retainers by his side. One was a silent cultivator from the Ironcliff Manor who was said to be a cultivator of the Devil Dao and had been hiding in the Ironcliff Manor for decades. The other was a 7th-tier golden body martial artist who could influence the martial arts fate of a small vassal state. Wei Bai turned his head and looked at a burly old man standing behind the crowd. He asked, "Master Liao, can you tell the background of that white-robed scholar?" That person was originally resting with his eyes closed. After hearing the young master of Ironcliff Manor's question, he opened his eyes and smiled. Judging from his breathing and footsteps, he should be equivalent to a level 5 martial artist at the border of our great Guan dynasty. Compared to the ordinary level 5 idiots of the pugilistic world, he is still slightly stronger. Beside the burly old man, an old nanny with a naturally malicious face said with a hoarse voice, "Young master, Liao is not wrong." The old man snorted coldly. According to the great difference in age between them, it was actually not arrogant of the old woman to call him a kid. However, he was after all a golden body martial artist who had fought his way out of the battlefield. The old woman had never shown him the slightest respect because of her identity as a chi cultivator. That man from a large sect of the pugilistic world of the Great Guan dynasty rubbed his hands and smiled. "Young Master Wei, why don't I go down and find that young martial artist who wears a hat and test his strength? Let's treat it as a sideshow to entertain everyone and relieve their boredom. At the same time, I'll be bold enough to ask for some tips so that Mr. Liao can give me some pointers on my fist technique." The sect he belonged to was the leader of the southern pugilistic world of the Great Guan dynasty. It was said that there were close to 10,000 people in the sect, and they controlled a lot of wealth related to water transportation and salt permits. Their wealth was rolling in. In fact, it was all thanks to the face of Ironcliff Manor. Otherwise, the money would not enter their stomachs and would burn their throats. There was also a golden body martial arts grandmaster in the sect, but he said in private that he was more likely to lose than win against that Mr. Liao. In the northern pugilistic world, there was a sect where everyone used a sword. The sect leader and disciples did not number more than 100 people, but they were able to command the heroes of the northern pugilistic world. That old sect leader who liked to roam the pugilistic world alone was rumored to be a martial grandmaster who had quietly ascended to the remote travel realm. It was just that no one had seen him use his sword for at least 20 years. However, the people of the southern pugilistic world all said that the old man's whereabouts were uncertain because he wanted to avoid the taunts of those earth immortals on the mountain, especially arrogant sword cultivators. That was because a pugilistic world sect dared to use the word sect in its name. Wasn't that asking for a beating? Hearing that man's courteous words, Wei Bai shook his head and smiled. "I think it's better to forget about it. You martial artists at the foot of the mountain are not like our Ironcliff Manor's soldiers on the battlefield. Each one of you cares about face more than the other. I think that young martial artist has it tough. He probably felt that he had obtained a fated chance that should belong to a cultivator with great difficulty and made that little water monster recognize him as his master. That's why when he went out on this trip and boarded the immortal ferry, he still couldn't forget his pugilistic temperament and likes to show off everywhere. Let him be. Now that he's at the Spring Dew Garden, there are all kinds of people there. If he still dares to be so unrestrained, he'll still suffer." That man said with a face full of admiration, "Young Master Wei really has the heart of a bodhisattva and the bearing of an immortal." Wei Bai smiled and shook his head. "What kind of immortal am I now? Let's talk about it later." He suddenly turned his head. "But you, Ding Tong, are a pugilistic person and not a cultivator like us. You can only live a little longer. A little longer, like that sect leader Peng whose whereabouts are unpredictable, then you'll have the chance to say something like that." Behind the crowd, the old nanny who stood shoulder to shoulder with the sturdy old man at the door sneered. "That Peng guy deserves to be in the far travel realm and has to hide all over the place. If he was in the golden body realm like Liao Boy, he wouldn't cause any trouble. We cultivators wouldn't want to dirty the soles of our shoes by trampling him to death. Now that he's secretly ascended to the martial 8th realm and has become a slightly bigger grasshopper, he just has to wield a sword. His sect has the word sect in it. If the people on the mountain don't trample him to death, who will they trample on? The sturdy old man with the surname Liao sneered. Do you dare to say something like that in front of old Peng? The old nanny clicked her tongue and said, not to mention in front of him, if he dares to stand in front of me, I'll point at his nose and say that. The old man in the golden body realm couldn't be bothered to argue with an old woman. He closed his eyes and rested his mind again. The man with the identity of a martial artist didn't feel awkward at all. After all, they weren't talking about him. So what if they were talking about him? It was a great honor to be able to get a few words from an old consecrator of the Iron Wall Manor. When they returned to the sect, it would be a topic of conversation. Wei Bai reached out to hold the railing and sighed. It's said that sect leader He from the north went south not long ago. Not only is sect leader He extraordinarily talented, ascending to the upper 5 realms at such a young age, but she's also endlessly blessed. As a cultivator from a small place like the Treasure Bottleneck, she was able to find a small grotto heaven as soon as she came to our north continent. Then, she successively subdued many great demons and ghosts. Finally, in such a short period of time, she built an immortal home with the word sect in her name. Furthermore, she was able to gain a foothold there. She even relied on the mountain defense array formation and the small grotto heaven to defeat 2 Jade Realm cultivators. She's really fascinating. When I travel to the north in the future, I'll definitely go and see her. Even if I can only see her from afar, it'll be worth it. The young female cultivator from the Spring Dew Gardens Illumination Night Cottage couldn't help but feel a little depressed. However, she quickly felt relieved. This was because Wei Bai knew very well that compared to the unattainable sect leader he was the only one who had the opportunity to see her from afar. Wei Bai suddenly leaned closer to the girl beside him and said softly, "Ching Ching, the moon in the sky is the moon in the sky. The person in front of me is the person in front of me. I know very well in my heart." The young female cultivator's frown immediately relaxed and she smiled. On the first floor's railing, that little dirty thing who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth was still happily running along the railing. As for that young man in a white robe that was slightly stained with dirt, he was still pretending to be cultured and waving his folding fan. Wei Bai suddenly smiled knowingly. Elsewhere on the 2nd floor, there was actually someone who finally felt that they were an eyesore and chose to make a move. Wei Bai frowned. That strand of spiritual chi condensed into a sleeve arrow for a sneak attack. It should have hit that black-clothed little girl's leg. After shattering her knee, the sleeve arrow that penetrated her bone just so happened to be able to break through the shallow formation barrier that the ferry was flying over. From an outsider's perspective, it was just that the little girl lost her balance and fell off the ferry, then accidentally fell to her death. There was no need to take responsibility for this ferry. She walked over the railing and fell to her death. The ferry didn't even sway, so who could be blamed? It was a pity that the concealed arrow of spiritual energy had been blocked by the white-clothed scholar's fan. However, it didn't look easy. He quickly took 2 steps back and steadied himself by leaning against the railing. Wei Bai shook his head. So it really was a piece of trash. Fortunately, he didn't let that lackey by his side make a move. Otherwise, if news of this spread out, wouldn't he and the Iron Shell Manor lose face? This trip to the Spring Dew Garden was going to be troublesome. That white-clothed scholar's face was full of anger. He shouted loudly, "No one is managing your ferry. There are people on the 2nd floor committing murder." The black-clothed little girl hurriedly stopped. She jumped off the railing and hid by his side. Her face was deathly pale, but she didn't forget his instructions. She asked through the ripples in her mind, "More powerful than that yellow-robed elder?" The white-clothed scholar didn't speak through his mind. Instead, he directly nodded and said softly, "Much more powerful." It was just that his power didn't lie in his cultivation, but in his heart. The little girl was somewhat anxious. "Then let's hurry and run." The white-clothed scholar's expression suddenly changed. He lightly placed a hand on her head and closed his folding fan. He said with a slight smile, if we run today, we'll just let this group of scourges kill other people tomorrow? The world is a pot of porridge. Those fly droppings should be hooked and thrown out. Every droppings we see will be thrown out. Do you still remember that group of people we met in the Jianghu? Do you still remember what I said afterwards? The little girl thought for a moment and nodded. You said that when disaster really comes, everyone seems to be weak. Before this, everyone seems to be strong because there will always be weaker weaklings. Previously, they had slowly climbed the mountain together. According to the local people, there had been something strange on that mountain recently, so they wanted to go take a look. On the secluded mountain path, they met a group of Jianghu heroes who were riding fast and drinking wine. They were high-spirited and spoke loudly, saying that they wanted to slaughter that spirit so that they could become famous. For some reason, the white-clothed scholar who was walking in the middle of the path didn't give way. Then, he was directly sent flying by a tall horse. The people riding the horse all laughed loudly. The sound of the horse's hooves echoed as they left. However, she wasn't worried at that time. A sword immortal who could kill that yellow-robed elder. Moreover, he didn't even use the flying sword he kept in his wine pot. However, she still felt angry. At that time, she couldn't help but open her mouth. In the end, the white-clothed scholar was already standing by her side. He gently pressed her head and smiled, saying that it was fine. Afterwards, the two of them saw that group of Jianghu martial artists blocked the path of a 2 jong tall ferocious-looking spirit. At that time, it was still chewing on an arm in its mouth. In its hand was a man's badly mutilated corpse. The little girl in black roughly saw that the one who died was the scoundrel who had taken the lead to send the white-clothed scholar flying. In the end, she hid behind the white-clothed scholar. He stretched out his folded fan and pointed at the ferocious-looking burly spirit. He said with a smile, "Eat your last meal first." The spirit blocking the path actually threw away the corpse in its hand, wanting to escape into the depths of the forest. Those Jianghu people who had eaten their fill and wanted to go up the mountain to kill the spirit began to kneel and kowtow, begging for help. The little girl didn't like this Jianghu story too much. From the beginning to the end, she didn't like it too much. On the observation deck on the second floor of the ferry, there was also a group of people. After seeing that the white-clothed scholar blocked that hand, they felt bored. They let that big and small person pass. And that white-clothed scholar didn't have the guts to denounce them. It seemed that he just pretended that nothing had happened. The people on the observation deck roared with laughter. They didn't have the slightest fear of letting that big and small person know who had attacked. A ferry worker braced himself and walked to the white-clothed scholar's side. He wasn't worried that this ferry guest would be long-winded, but that he had been forced to come here by the steward. If he wasn't careful, he would provoke the disdain of the guests on the second floor. After this trip to Springdew Garden, he wouldn't be able to get any reward. That young worker stood in front of the white-clothed scholar with a stern face. He asked, "What are you blindly shouting about? Which dog eyes of yours saw someone commit murder?" The white-clothed scholar turned his head to look at the little girl in black. "It was he who sold you the court bulletin. He even persuaded the other guest not to kill you. He was a good person for once." She shook her head. It was an even older person. The white-clothed scholar lightly patted his chest with his folding fan and muttered to himself, "People who cultivate the Tao need to cultivate their minds. Otherwise, if they walk with a limp, they won't be able to reach the highest point." The little girl in black tugged at his sleeve and covered her mouth with one hand. She raised her head and quietly said to him, "You're not allowed to be angry. Otherwise, I'll be angry at you. I'm very fierce." The white-clothed scholar looked up at the second floor. "No, I have to be reasonable. I didn't say enough last time at Blue Cloud Lake." The young worker reached out to push the white-clothed scholar that he didn't like. Why was he pretending to be refined? He reached out with his hand. "You still won't stop, right? Go back to the room and cool off." Then he was dumbfounded. Why was his hand unable to reach out an inch in front of that person? The white-clothed scholar didn't look at him. He said with a smile, "Just because I'm at Realm 4, you really think I'm a Realm 4 martial artist?" The young worker suddenly bent down and cupped his hands with a smile. "Guest, Please continue to enjoy the scenery. I won't disturb you any further." Without another word, he turned and ran. He really managed to escape. He ran to the bow of the boat and turned his head to take a look. The white-clothed scholar had already disappeared, leaving only a frowning little girl in black. On the second floor of the ferry, there was a viewing platform not far from Wei Bai and the others. 7 or 8 male and female cultivators who were traveling together retreated together. In the blink of an eye, the white-robed scholar, who was struggling to block a spiritual aura sleeve arrow, was already standing on the railing for some inexplicable reason. With one hand behind his back and the other gently fanning himself, he looked down at them from above. When one of them wanted to speak, the circulation of his spirit chi suddenly stagnated. It was as if he was carrying a mountain on his back. His face turned red and he was speechless. The white-clothed scholar smiled and said, "When I'm reasonable, you just have to listen." With a snap, he closed the folding fan and lifted it gently. The chi refinement warrior who shot the arrow was lifted up in the air. The white-clothed scholar grabbed his head and threw him out of the ferry. The folding fan was lifted again. Another person was lifted up by the neck and slapped out of the ferry with a sleeve. All of them were turned into dumplings for that person. The viewing platform was already empty except for the white-clothed scholar who had a vermilion wine pot hanging on his waist. He leaned back and actually flew out of the ferry. His 2 snow-white sleeves fluttered and he fell in an instant, disappearing without a trace. A moment later, he appeared on the railing of the ferry again. He looked up at the viewing platform of the heaven room and smiled without saying a word. Wei Bai's mouth twitched. "Master Liao, what do you say?" The sturdy old man had already strode forward. He used his aura chi to push away those useless people who only knew how to brag and flatter. The old man stared at the white-clothed scholar and said in a deep voice, "It's hard to say." Wei Bai turned his head and glanced at the slightly pale pugilistic man. After retracting his gaze, he smiled and said, "Then isn't it a little difficult?" The old nanny also stood beside Wei Bai. "What's so troublesome about this? Let Liao boy go down and play with him for a while. We'll know what he's capable of after weighing him." Wei Bai did not make a decision on his own. A servant under someone else's roof was also a person, especially one with great ability. He had never been stingy with his intimacy and respect. So Wei Bai said softly, "Master Liao, you don't have to force yourself." The sturdy old man clenched his fist, his joints crackling like firecrackers. He sneered, "The embroidered pillows in the south can't take a beating. Old Peng's swordsman in the north is protected by that minister. It's not easy to meet someone who dares to challenge our iron mystic manner. I don't care if he's a martial artist or a cultivator. I won't let him go today." The golden body elder of iron mystic manner did not punch out with his imposing manner. Instead, he supported himself with one hand on the railing and gently landed on the deck of the first floor. He smiled and said, "Kid, warm up my hands with me. Don't worry, I won't kill you. There's no enmity between us." The man raised his head and pressed his finger fan against his chin. He seemed to be thinking about something. Then, he folded his fan and also landed on the ground. "It's not good to let someone make a move first." The white-clothed scholar paused for a moment and then said with a brilliant smile, "Then I'll let him make 3 moves first." With one hand behind his back and the other holding the fan, he pointed at his forehead. "Make 3 punches first. We'll talk later. You'll be responsible for your own life and death. How about it?" The two of them had a tacit understanding. They each stood on the 2 sides of the ferry, about 20 steps apart. All the passengers on the ferry were whispering to each other. Wei Bai's side felt even more incredulous. Only a passenger on the first floor who had set off from the south of the Minister of Treasure Kingdom and was fleeing to Spring Dew Garden had a pale face and trembling lips. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Why did I meet this young sword immortal with an unpredictable temperament and profound Tao again? Young Master Sword Immortal, I'm running away so that I won't see you again. I really didn't mean to take the same ferry as you. The golden body elder with the surname Liao sneered and said, "Kid, are you really going to let me make 3 punches first?" The white-clothed scholar said with a face of surprise, "Not enough. Then 4 punches." If you don't feel confident, then 5 punches. Just 5 punches. I really can't go any further. If you go any further, those who are watching will find it boring. The old man gave a thumbs up and said with a smile, after 3 punches, I hope you'll still have an intact corpse. He said no more and opened his fist stance. Aura chi surged and his fist intent soared. Everyone on the first and second floors were in a situation where the wind was blowing in their faces. Some of the weaker chi cultivators and martial artists were almost unable to open their eyes. There was a loud boom. The walls and windows on that side of the room actually produced a series of continuous cracking sounds. That sturdy old man stood where the white-clothed scholar had previously stood. When he looked again, that white-clothed scholar had actually been shattered into pieces in an instant. He was standing at the bow of the ferry, his white robe and large sleeves billowing like snow. This made some people who recognized the old man's identity from the Iron Mystic Manor could only swallow back some of their cheers. That person's Adam's apple moved slightly, as if he was definitely not as relaxed as he appeared to be. He must have been forcefully swallowing the blood that had surged to the side of his mouth. Then, he still said with a smile, if it were anyone else, this punch would have at most killed a 6th realm martial artist on the spot. Old Senior is still kind and merciful. The old man with the surname Liao narrowed his eyes. The young man's white robe had just been shaken off by his fist intent, but there were no cracks at all. The old man said in a low voice, a high-grade robe, no wonder, no wonder. Good scheming, good shrewdness, you've hidden it well. That person still held the folding fan in his hand as he slowly walked forward. I sold everything I had with great difficulty to buy this robe, and you're complaining that I wasn't killed by your punch. Old Senior, if you continue to be like this, you're not upholding the righteousness of the pugilistic world. Fine, 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 I'll remove the effect of the robe. There are still 2 more punches. The old man stepped on the ground, and the entire ferry actually dropped more than 10 feet. His figure rushed forward like lightning, and it was a swift and violent punch that was at the peak of his fist intent. This time, that white-clothed scholar should have directly exploded, or at least been punched through the bow of the ferry and fell to the ground, right? No. Not only that. That person was still standing in the same place, still holding the folding fan in one hand. However, he only raised the hand that was originally behind him. This time, it was the burly old man who slid backward. After he stood still, his shoulders tilted slightly. On the second floor, Wei Bai's face was gloomy. The old woman's face was as gloomy as water, and her mind was wavering. The white-clothed scholar did not move for a long time. Then, he exclaimed, and his feet did not move. He pretended to shake his body a few times. Senior's fist technique is like a god's. It's terrifying. Fortunately, Senior only has 1 punch left. I still have lingering fears. Fortunately, Senior was polite and did not agree to let me have 5 punches in one go. I'm still very scared now. All the passengers on the ferry were about to collapse. Damn it, they had never seen a person who was so good at acting and so careless in their lives. The burly old man smiled. Then, let's have the last punch. He took a deep breath. The old man's vigorous energy spread open his long robe. In the next moment, a strange phenomenon occurred. The dignified golden-bodied martial elder of Iron Shell Manor did not directly punch the white-robed scholar. Instead, he deviated midway to find the black-robed little girl who had been standing by the railing. Every time she saw the white-robed scholar safe and sound, she would keep a straight face and hold back her laughter. She would secretly raise her 2 small hands and clap her hands lightly. Her clapping movements were quick but silent. She must have purposely not clapped her hands together. Another moment passed. It was as if the river of time had stopped. A white-clothed man stood next to the black-clothed girl. The 5 fingers of his left hand were like hooks that gripped the neck of the Iron Cliff Manor martial grandmaster. The latter, who was leaning forward, could not move forward. Blood flowed from the latter's neck. The white-clothed scholar held the folding fan in one hand. He gently loosened his fingers and pushed the fan against the old man's forehead. With a bang, a golden body martial artist who had fought his way out of the battle directly crashed into the stern of the ferry and fell out. The white-clothed scholar turned his head to look at the second floor. His left hand gently rubbed the railing several times. He narrowed his eyes and smiled. "What do you say?" On the second floor's observation deck, Wei Bai did not speak. The old woman did not speak. A moment later, everyone could hear the distant rumbling of the beast. At the back of the ferry, a golden light exploded. Then a sword light suddenly arrived. There was a person with the appearance of a young man, wearing a golden hairpin on his head. He looked at the railing and asked, "Was it you who split apart the thundercloud of my golden crow palace with a sword?" The white-clothed scholar had a blank expression. He asked, "What are you talking about?" The young sword immortal helplessly smiled. "When we reach the spring dew garden, I'll treat you to tea." The sword light went far away. The black-clothed girl did not know why, but she suddenly felt that this kind of mountain story was very heroic. But she just could not feel happy. She lowered her head and walked next to the white-clothed scholar. She lightly pulled at his sleeve. "I'm sorry." That person crouched down. His hands grabbed her face and gently pulled. Then he made a funny face at her and laughed softly. "Ma ma ma." 5:11. The girl in black smiled shyly. The white-robed scholar suddenly pulled the golden robe on his body and covered her head. In an instant, the black-robed little girl turned into a white-robed little girl. However, there was another white robe under the scholar's snow-white robe. Chen Pingan's eyes were clear. He stood up slowly and said softly, "No matter what happens later, don't move. Don't move at all. If you die today, I'll let the entire North Continent know that you're the big water monster of Mute Lake. Your surname is Ju, so you'll be called Ju Mealy. But don't be afraid, I'll try to protect you, just like how I'll try to protect some people." After that, Chen Pingan turned around and swept his gaze over the first and second floors of the ferry. He spoke neither hurriedly nor slowly. "Jiao Cheng, I know you're on this ferry. You've endured for so long, yet you still haven't thought of a surefire plan to kill me. Are you too weak after leaving your lair, or am I too strong? If you don't act now, I think your chances of success will be even smaller when we reach the spring dew garden." No one on the ferry understood what this guy was talking about. Only a handful of passengers on the ferry vaguely felt that the name Jiao Cheng was somewhat familiar, but they couldn't recall where they had heard it from. The ferry was moving slowly above the sea of clouds. Bathed in the sunlight, it looked like it was wearing a layer of golden clothes. Chen Pingan patted the blade-strengthening gourd at his waist and used telepathy to form a line. His lips moved slightly and he said with a smile, "Why, are you afraid that I have a backup plan? You're the Lord of Jingguan City, the Lord of the Skeleton Beach. You shouldn't be so timid. You must have heard about the commotion at the attendant city. I almost died. I was afraid that you'd be bored, so I reduced the 5 punches to 3. Isn't my hospitality much better than your Skeleton Beach? The first day of the flying sword is with me. You and the entire Skeleton Beach are here. You won't get another chance like this if you miss it." As long as it was Jiao Cheng, he would naturally hear it. He must have heard it too. Chen Pingan said with a smile, "Do you think I'm destined to not be able to invite you to appear?" The eyes of a ferryman hiding in the corner of the bow instantly turned as black as ink. A cultivator of the Silver Screen country who was lucky enough to survive in the Dragon Palace of Tsungyun Lake and went to the Spring Dew Garden to seek refuge also had such a phenomenon. Their souls instantly shattered and they no longer had any vitality. Before they died, they didn't realize that there was a seed in the depths of their souls that had been quietly blossoming and bearing fruit. Of the 2 dead men, one slowly walked out while the other stood by the window. The 2 people who were already dead had smiles on their faces. They used the ripples in their hearts to communicate. One of them laughed and said, "Other than Zhu Quan, who else is there? Which other ancestor of the hemp sect? Or did all 3 of them come? Yes, they should all be here." The other person said, "You're really like me back then. When I see you, I miss the years when I had to rack my brains to survive. It was very difficult, but very fulfilling. Those years made me live more like a human than a human." Chen Pingan's gaze was not on the 2 dead people. He still looked around and focused his voice into a line, I heard that the real person who achieved Tao at the top of the mountain is not as simple as having an out-of-body state and an out-of-body body with the yang spirit. You hid so well. You must not be afraid that the hemp sect will find you. Why, are you so sure that the hemp sect and I won't kill all the passengers on the ferry? Thanks to you, Gao Cheng, and He Xiaoyong, what I'm doing now is very similar to you. Moreover, your real trump card must be a powerful Jindan with great killing power, or a hidden martial artist in the remote travel state. Is it difficult to find? From the moment I predicted that you would leave the skeleton beach until I boarded this ferry, you, Gao Cheng, have already lost. There was a moment of silence. The dead person standing at the window said, "You relied on gambling?" Chen Pingan was still the same Chen Pingan, but like a white-robed scholar, he narrowed his eyes and sneered, "Gambling? Others gamble at the gambling table, but I've been gambling my whole life since I can remember. Let's not talk about luck. In terms of gambling skills, I've never seen anyone my age better than me. Cao Ci, no. Ma Kushuan, no. Yang Ningxing, no." He used his left hand to roll up his right sleeve and took a step forward. Then, he used his right hand to roll up his left sleeve and took another step forward. His movements were extremely slow. He raised his head and a cool breeze brushed against his face. He shook his sleeves. After rolling up both sleeves, there was naturally no spring breeze on his sleeves. I imagined that the Ghost Axe Palace's Du was you, the assassin who deliberately hid in the dung bucket was you, the wild cultivator who took out a small coin in the alley was you, the young escort who gave me the water pouch was you, and even the old monk who confronted the yellow-robed ancestor was you. I also imagined that the little girl beside me would be you. It couldn't be helped. Because he was Gao Cheng, there would be more what-ifs. So many that it wasn't 1,101, but the one that would come whenever he wanted. That's why it's been a tough journey for me. But it's worth it. My cultivation of the heart has never progressed so quickly before. I advise you to be more capable today. Otherwise, I'll immediately turn around and go to the skeleton beach. Politeness demands reciprocity. Believe me, Chen Pingan, there will be a big accident between you and the skeleton beach. The ferry clerk nodded and smiled. I believe you. I, Gao Cheng, have never said such nonsense before or after my death. The person at the window was suddenly enlightened. He smiled sincerely and said, I understand. I missed the one who wanted you dead the most. It's my turn to suffer. She must have hurt some of her Dao foundation during the battle in Follower City. If I were He Xiaoyong, I would completely cut off the connection with you so that I wouldn't be implicated by you in the future. But since she's He Xiaoyong, maybe she's just hiding in the secret realm of the sect's small grotto heaven to temporarily cut off the karma with you. These aren't important. What's important is that I, Gao Cheng, have made an extremely opposite mistake with the same result because of you inexplicable bastards. When she's here, I'll attack you. Now that she's gone, I'll naturally attack you even more. Your way of thinking is really interesting. Chen Pingan stretched out his thumb and wiped the corner of his mouth. I'm not familiar with He Xiaoyong. You can call me a dog, but don't put me in a relationship with her. What's next? 2 Jindan ghosts, are you humiliating me or humiliating yourself, Gao Cheng? An old man with a sword on his back slowly walked out from the stern. He should be staying in a room by the window on the other side of the ferry. But for some reason, the tall old man's footsteps were a little shaky. His face was distorted, as if he was struggling. After a moment, he exhaled a long breath. Using the same martial arts method of condensing sound into a line, he lamented, every self that can't be restrained will indeed become another person. You should take this as a warning. After the old man appeared, there were people outside the ferry who worked together to cast a spell to isolate the small world. The old man didn't care at all. Chen Pingan asked, do I need you to teach me? Do you deserve it? The old man stared at the young man in white and smiled. Are you sure that this is the kind of distinction you want? A drop of scarlet blood seeped out from between Chen Pingan's eyebrows. He suddenly raised his hand, as if to signal that the outsiders didn't need to interfere. He patted the blade-strengthening gourd. The flying sword Chu Yi, whose real name was Fengju, hovered above the opening of the blade-strengthening gourd. He smiled sinisterly. The flying sword is right here. Shall we make a bet? The old man looked at the smile on the young man's face. The old man was also full of smiles. He was actually a little happy as he said, "Very good. I can confirm that you and I, Gao Cheng, had similar backgrounds and circumstances in the beginning." After the old man appeared, he didn't show any signs of drawing his sword. Instead, he stopped. "I only have one question now. In Attendant City, why didn't Zhu Quan and the others help you resist the heavenly tribulation?" Chen Pingan wiped his face with his left hand, wiping away his smile bit by bit. He said slowly, "It's very simple. I've told Sect Master Zhu from the beginning. As long as you, Gao Cheng, don't kill me personally, they don't have to show up even if I die." The old man nodded. Only the cultivators of the Linen sect would agree to such a thing. Only the current you, the Gao Cheng of the past, could make such a decision. This world should be for people like us to keep moving forward. The old man smiled. "Don't die in the hands of others. I'll wait for you in Jingguan City. I'm afraid that you'll change your mind when the time comes, so I advise you to kill your way through the Skeleton Beach and reach Jingguan City in one go." The old man raised his head and looked into the distance. It was probably the southernmost part of the North Continent. "On the Great Dao, I'm all alone. Finally, I've met a true comrade. I failed to kill you this time, and I even paid the price of a soul and a spirit. When I think about it, it's actually not that unacceptable." "That's right, you. You should thank the young lady from Jinjuo Temple and the little water monster behind you. Without these two small accidents to calm you down, you wouldn't have been able to reach this ferry no matter how careful you were. Zhu Quan and the other two might have been able to snatch the flying sword, but they definitely wouldn't have been able to save your life." The old man shook his sleeves. The souls of the dead people at the window and at the bow of the ferry that were split into two completely dissipated between heaven and earth. Only then did the two dead people truly die. In an instant, they turned into white bones and fell to the ground. The old man reached over his shoulder and slowly pulled out the long sword. Chen Pingan didn't move at all. The old man laughed. "Even if it's just a soul and a spirit of mine, the three pure Jade Realm cultivators of the Linen sect aren't worthy of such a harvest." After the old man pulled out the long sword, he cut off his own neck inch by inch. He stared at the young man who didn't seem surprised at all. "The god sitting high up in the Dragon Palace of Blue Cloud Lake is more like me. After we decide life and death at the Skeleton Beach, if you die, I'll bring you to see what the real Fengju is. If I die, you can also go and see for yourself. However, it's really hard for me to die." A pure martial artist of the far travel realm cut off his entire head just like that. The head rolled to the ground, but the headless corpse still stood upright with both hands holding onto the sword. On the ferry, a small world was instantly isolated. The three old ancestors of the Linen sect appeared together. The two male old ancestors went to the vicinity of the two sets of white bones respectively and used their divine arts and spells to investigate. Zhu Quan stood beside Chen Pingan and sighed. "Chen Pingan, if you continue like this, it'll be very dangerous." However, Chen Pingan said, "I use my evil thoughts to sharpen the sword, it won't hinder heaven and earth." Zhu Quan wanted to say something but stopped. He shook his head and turned to look at the headless corpse. He was silent for a long time. "Chen Pingan, will you become the second Gao Cheng?" Chen Pingan didn't say a word and only smoothed out his two sleeves slowly. Zhu Quan looked at the corpse with a complicated gaze. "I naturally hate Jing Guanqing and Gao Cheng to the bone, but I have to admit that I've always respected Gao Cheng in the depths of my heart." Chen Pingan only turned around and lowered his head to look at the little girl who was motionless in the long river of stagnant light. The golden wine in the daoist robe seemed to be getting darker, which made him smile. No matter how dark it was, it couldn't be darker than that girl, right? Zhu Quan smiled. "No matter what, our Linen sect owes you a huge favor." Chen Pingan shook his head. "We're just even." She retracted her gaze and asked curiously, "Are you really going to return to the Skeleton Beach with us and find Gao Cheng to cause trouble?" Chen Pingan shook his head. "Let him wait first. I'll finish exploring the North Continent first." Zhu Quan couldn't help but laugh. Chen Pingan turned around and asked, Can you let this little girl move first? Zhu Quan nodded. In that instant, the little girl, who had changed from black to white, blinked her eyes and then froze. She first looked at Chen Pinggan, then looked around. Her face was filled with confusion, and she began to furrow her thin eyebrows. Chen Pinggan squatted down and asked with a smile, "Do you want to go to the Spring Dew Garden to find a place to stay, or go to my hometown to take a look?" The little girl asked, "I can choose neither. Can I go with you in the Jianghu?" Chen Pinggan smiled and shook his head. "No, you can't." The little girl frowned and negotiated, "If I'm with you, you can eat fish with pickled cabbage." Chen Pinggan still shook his head. "Go to my hometown, there's good food and fun there, maybe you can even find new friends. Also, I have a friend called Xu Yuanxia, he's a hero, and he happens to be writing a travel book. You can tell him your story and let him write it for you in the book." The little girl was a little tempted. She suddenly thought of something and tugged at the snow-white robe that actually fit her very well. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "You can continue to wear it. It doesn't mean much to me now. Wearing it before was just a trick to fool the bad guys." The little girl just shook her head. Chen Pinggan had no choice but to gently tug at his collar and spread his hands. The robe automatically put on him. Zhu Quan clicked his tongue. "Good fellow, from the green robe and bamboo hat to this outfit, he looks quite handsome." Chen Pinggan carried her to the railing, then jumped up himself, and finally sat together. Chen Pinggan turned his head and asked, "Sect Master Zhu, can you stop eavesdropping, just for a while?" Zhu Quan smiled and nodded. Chen Pinggan looked into the distance, clenched his fists, and gently placed them on his knees. "Did the words I said earlier scare you?" The little girl crossed her arms and coldly snorted, "Nonsense, I'm not scared." Chen Pinggan grunted, "Daring to give me a string of chestnuts, you're really brave." The little girl laughed. Chen Pinggan asked, "Jumili, what do you think of this name?" "You don't know, I'm famous for giving good names, everyone gives me a thumbs up." The little girl was skeptical, but she felt that having a name was better than having only a surname. Chen Pinggan took out a jug of wine, opened the mud seal, and drank a mouthful, saying, "In the future when I'm not by your side, you must know one thing. The evil deeds of evil people are not all fierce and scary. They kill the innocent. Just hearing about it makes one's hair stand on end. Most of them are like the night breeze in Yellow Wind Valley. We can walk around without any hindrance, but we feel uncomfortable and uncomfortable. In the future, you must be careful of these invisible and untouchable evil intentions. Knowing this is not asking you to be a bad person, but you'll cherish the kindness in the world, big and small, and know that it's not easy to come by." Chen Pinggan then reached behind him and pointed to the second floor of the ferry. "For example, in addition to the bad guy who hit you and kicked you, you also have to be careful of the young man who appeared in front of me first, who is not even a cultivator. You must be more careful of him than the manager who sold you the court bulletin. You must be more careful of the people around the old nanny, not the young man or the young woman. You must pay more attention to the more inconspicuous people around them, who may be the person standing in the corner. You must be careful of the evil intentions that are not so obvious. One kind is the smart bad guy, who hides very deep and calculates very far. The other kind is the stupid bad guy, who has instincts that they are unaware of. So, we must think more than them, and try to make ourselves smarter. All the powerful things that we can see at a glance, such as flying swords, fist techniques, robes, shrewdness, and family background, are not really powerful and dangerous." The little girl furrowed her little face and eyebrows. This time, she didn't pretend to understand, but really wanted to understand what he was saying. Because she knew that it was for her own good. Even if she still didn't understand why it was for her own good that he had to say these really difficult things. Then that person reached out his hand and gently pressed on her head. "I know you don't understand, but I just can't help but say it. So, I hope you can go to my hometown, grow up a little, and then roam the Jianghu. Growing up, you are a big water monster, not a child from a poor family, so you don't have to be too anxious to grow up. Don't be anxious, grow up slowly." The little girl in black made a sound of acknowledgement. "I remember it all." "All right, I won't lie to you, I actually only remember half of it." Chen Pinggan drank his wine. "It doesn't matter if you don't remember the first few things. But the next few things, you must not forget. First, my hometown is a place called Longquan County in the Aquarius continent. I have many mountains, one of them is called Luorpa Mountain. I have a first disciple called Pei Qian. You must not let it slip to her, say that you knocked her master's chestnuts, and more than one or two. You don't have to be afraid of her, just do as I taught you, say that her master asked you to pass on a message, telling her to copy books properly. That's enough. Speaking till here, Chen Pinggan retracted his hand, shook the wine pot, and smiled. You can add another sentence, just say that master misses her. Chen Pinggan continued, the second thing, I have a student called Kuidong Shan. If you meet him, you feel that his brain seems to have water in it, but you don't have to be afraid of him. 5:12. Ding Tong held onto the railing with both hands, completely unaware of why she was sitting there. She asked blankly, am I going to die? The white-clothed scholar took out his folding fan, extended his arm, and patted the railing. Ding Tong turned her head and looked over. On the observation deck on the second floor of the ferry, there was Wei Bai of the Iron Cliff Manor, Fairy Ching Ching of the Spring Dew Garden, the ugly and intimidating old nanny, and those immortal scribes who usually didn't mind her status as a martial artist and were willing to drink with her. Everyone was indifferent. On the first floor, there were some who were watching the commotion, and some who secretly smiled at her. There was one person in particular who even gave her a thumbs up. Ding Tong turned her head. Despair, and then numbness, she lowered her head to look at the sea of clouds beneath her feet. The white-clothed scholar raised his hand, and a golden sword light swept out of the window and then soared into the sky. He laughed. Do you know why I didn't make a move against you even though you were clearly a good-for-nothing and the main culprit? That golden-bodied old man could have stayed out of the matter, but I killed him instead. Ding Tong shook her head and said hoarsely, I don't really understand. After the white-robed scholar used his sword, he did not move again. He raised his head and looked into the distance. The casual evil of a Realm 7 martial practitioner and the all-out evil of a Realm 5 martial practitioner will have a world of difference in influence on this part of the world. In the eyes of the weak, the smaller your territory is, the more you look like God who holds the power of life and death. Moreover, that papier-mâché golden body said that he didn't have any grievances and wouldn't kill anyone. His first punch had already killed that outsider in his mind. However, I could accept this, so I sincerely let him take the second and third punches. After that, he began to seek his own death. As for you, you have to thank that young man who called me a sword immortal. Back then, he stopped you from jumping off the observation deck and coming down to ask me for advice on fist techniques. Otherwise, the one who died wouldn't have been the old man who blocked the disaster for you, but you. Judging the matter as it is, your crime doesn't warrant death. Moreover, that Jiao Cheng left a bit of suspense and deliberately disgusted you. It doesn't matter. I'll just take it that you're the same as I was back then. Someone used a Dao technique on your heart, and as a result, your temperament was affected, and that's why you did something that wholeheartedly sought death. Reason is not something that the weak can only use to complain. It is not something that you need to kneel down and kowtow before you can speak. Ding Tong's mind was completely blank. He didn't hear much at all. He was only thinking about whether he should wait for the sword to fall and then die. Or, he should at least be a little more heroic and jump off the ferry and become a martial artist of the 8th realm who rode the wind and traveled far. The white-robed scholar no longer spoke. You people are like those horse-riding martial artists who go to the mountains to die. Along the way, you will also kill a few pedestrians who are just an eyesore to you. On the road of life, there are unknown wilderness everywhere. It is a great place to commit crimes. In the countryside, in the marketplace, in Jianghu, in the officialdom, and in the mountains. There were countless people like that. It was the same for their parents, themselves, and their descendants. There was no way to stop him. Back then at Huaihuang Country's Jinjuo Temple, why was the little girl sad and disappointed? Because at that time, the white-robed scholar Chen Pinggan, if one were to put aside his true identity and cultivation, and only talk about the words and actions he showed on that road, it was exactly the same as those people who went up the mountain to die. What hurt her the most was not that weak scholar's pedantry, but that sentence, if I am knocked unconscious and an outsider steals my book box, will you pay for it? Such words and attitude were what hurt the little girl the most. She had shown kindness to the world and others, but that person not only did not appreciate it, he even showed her malice. However, the good thing about the little girl of Jinjuo Temple was that even though she was so sad, she was still sincerely concerned about the safety of that stupid and evil person. All Chen Pinggan could do now was to tell himself, doing good or evil is your own business. Therefore, Chen Pinggan felt that she was much better than he was. She should be called a good person. The white-robed scholar was silent. He was waiting for the return of the Hanks sect cultivators, and also listening to his own thoughts. Jiao Cheng's mind-examining trap was not too brilliant. It was an open scheme that made people look at him in a different light. The white-robed scholar pressed his folding fan against his chest and muttered to himself, "What does being caught off guard have to do with the Hanks sect? Even I know that it is not in my nature to vent my anger on the hemp sect like this. Why do you allow some ants to use tricks that you can see through? Jiao Cheng is slightly out of your control, so you can't bear this little grievance. I don't think a cultivator like you is any better. Just be a swordsman and don't think about becoming a sword immortal." Zhu Quan told him through the ripples of the mind lake that they would meet in the depths of the sea of clouds on their swords. If they were to use the ability to divide the world again, the mortals on the ferry would really have to wear out their origin. After getting off the ferry, they went straight south on their swords for 10 miles. Chen Pinggan stood up and took a step forward. A golden sword beam descended from the sky and hovered under his feet. The man and the sword disappeared in an instant. In the sea of clouds, other than Zhu Quan and the 2 Hanks sect ancestors, there was also an unfamiliar old Daoist. He wore a Daoist robe that Zhu Quan had never seen before. It was obvious that he was not part of the 3 lineages, nor was he a Daoist from the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu. As Chen Pinggan hovered on his sword, a middle-aged Daoist broke through the sea of clouds and strode over from afar. The mountains and rivers shrank and the sea of clouds covered several miles. It only took 2 steps. The middle-aged Daoist said in a deep voice, "The formation has been completed. If Jiao Cheng dares to spy on us with the ability to see mountains and rivers with his palm, he'll have to suffer a little." Zhu Quan looked a little embarrassed, but he still said, "It's my fault that I couldn't find any traces of Jiao Cheng on that martial artist." The old Daoist hesitated for a moment. Seeing the Hanks sect ancestors' Hall of Justice shake his head, the old Daoist said nothing. Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "I lost to Jiao Cheng and was played by him. I can't blame anyone else." Zhu Quan was still hugging the black-clothed girl in his arms, but she had already fallen into a deep sleep. Zhu Quan still didn't hide anything and said bluntly, "When we left earlier, we were actually paying attention to the movements of the ferry, just in case. In the end, what we were afraid of happened. We heard the conversation between you and Jiao Cheng. When Jiao Cheng dispersed the remnant of his soul, the girl yawned and a wisp of green smoke floated out from her mouth, just like the martial artist. He must have done something to the tortoise jelly. Fortunately, this time, I can assure you that other than Jiao Cheng staying at Jingguan City and possibly controlling our mountains and rivers, I, Zhu Quan, can assure you that at the very least, he has no other tricks up his sleeves on the little girl." The middle-aged Daoist's tone was indifferent, but it sounded even more sarcastic. "For one person, you disregarded the entire Skeleton Beach and even the entire southern Julu continent. If you, Chen Pinggan, weighed the pros and cons and thought for a long time before doing it, I wouldn't be able to say much if I stayed out of it. But you didn't hesitate at all." Chen Pinggan's words almost caused waves to rise in the middle-aged Daoist's heart. "Your Dao skills are too profound." The middle-aged Daoist sneered and said, "Since you're so loyal, you're willing to hand over such a precious treasure just because you picked up a little water monster. If I were an evil person, it would be my great fortune to have met you." The Daoist saw that the white-robed scholar wearing 2 robes took out a folding fan and gently patted his head. "Your realm is higher than Du Mao's." The middle-aged Daoist sneered and said, "Although I don't know the specific inside story, with your current realm, you must have been even more unbearable back then. Facing an ascendant realm expert, you, Chen Pinggan, were able to escape. Wasn't it all because of your secret backer?" No wonder you dared to threaten Jiao Cheng and threatened to go to the Ghost Valley to cause an accident in Jingguan City. Do you need me to help you send a message across the continent with a flying sword? The white-robed scholar smiled and said, Do you know that my backer doesn't even bother to look you in the eye? Don't you think that's infuriating? The middle-aged Daoist's face was gloomy, then he smiled and said, I'm not angry, I just don't like you, kid. A half-baked sword cultivator that Jiao Cheng sees as a kindred spirit, but you have a powerful backer. Plus, you're so shrewd at such a young age. Jiao Cheng has a good eye for people. You're not bad yourself, to be able to chat and laugh with Jiao Cheng, the heroic spirit of the Ghost Valley. If word gets out that someone gave Jiao Cheng a bottle of wine and he finished it, Chen Pingan's reputation in the North Continent will spread overnight to all the sects on the mountain. The white-robed scholar gave an "oh" sound and slapped his hand with his folding fan. You can shut up now. I'm only accompanying you out of respect for Sect Master Zhu. Now, you've already used up your share of talking to me. The middle-aged Daoist smiled and said, Learn from each other. Don't you think you're good at fighting? The white-robed scholar said, Then, for the sake of your master's 1,000-year-old peach tea, I'll say one more thing to you. The middle-aged Daoist waited for a moment. In the end, that person did not say a word, but only looked at him with pity. The Daoist suddenly realized that the so-called one more thing was really just one more thing. Zhu Quan was a little worried. She was really afraid that if the two of them continued chatting, they would roll up their sleeves and start fighting. When that happened, it would not be good for her to help either of them, and it was not in her nature to not help either. Or should she mediate the fight and then give each of them a few blows? Zhu Quan was good at fighting, but not at mediating. It was reasonable for there to be some accidental injuries. The old Daoist said softly, It's okay, for Chen Pingan and my disciple, it's a good thing. Zhu Quan sighed and said, Chen Pingan, since you've already guessed it, I won't introduce them. These two Daoist masters are from the small Xuanju temple in the Ghost Valley. This time, they were invited by us to come out of the mountain. You also know that our hemp sect is good at fighting and killing, but to deal with Jiao Cheng's Ghost Valley methods, we still need a Daoist master like the temple master to watch from the side. Chen Pingan nodded and did not say a word. According to Jiang Shangzhen, this old Daoist from the small Xuanju temple should be Yang Ningxing's temporary guardian. That night at the edge of the Iron Chain Bridge, this temple master who had the potential to become a heavenly lord guarded for an entire night, afraid that he would directly kill Yang Ningxing. As for the 1,000-year-old peach tea that was delivered by the golden-armored deity, Chen Pingan did not know if it was the whim of a Daoist perfected cultivator, or if it was a way of treating guests like Jiao Cheng. Chen Pingan did not know much about the small Xiandu temple and could not guess the true intention of the other party. Chen Pingan looked at the little girl in Zhu Quan's arms and said to Zhu Quan, I may have to trouble Sect Master Zhu with one more thing. It's not that I don't trust the hemp sect and the temple master, but I don't trust Jiao Cheng. So, I'll have to trouble the hemp sect to send the little girl to Longquan County via the cross-continent ferry and tell cloud-splitting Mountain Wei Pai to help me find a person called Kui Dongshan. Tell him that I want Kui Dongshan to immediately return to Luopa Mountain and carefully investigate the little girl's soul. Chen Pingan believed the cultivator of the hemp sect, but he did not really trust the temple master of the small Xuanju temple who had taught such a disciple, Xu Ming, and this nascent soul disciple with a bad temper and a bad brain. The middle-aged Daoist frowned. It was said that cloud-splitting Mountain Wei Pai, as the righteous deity of Dallas Northern Peak, had the potential to ascend to the pure Jade realm. Now, there were already some auspicious signs in the northern peak of Dali. Zhu Quan was a straightforward person. Can this Kui Dongshan do it? Chen Pingan said slowly, If he can't, then no one can. The temple master smiled and said, You do need to be more careful. I only dare to say that after trying my best, I did not find any clues on this little girl. If there really is a mistake, the consequences will be serious. It's good to have one more person investigate. Chen Pingan smiled. Temple master is magnanimous. The old Daoist dismissed it with a smile. Zhu Quan saw that the conversation was about to end, and suddenly said, Temple master, you guys go first. I'll stay behind to discuss some personal matters with Chen Pingan. The middle-aged Daoist retracted the cloud sea formation. Other things aside, this Daoist's method allowed Chen Pinggan to see the profoundness and ruthlessness of the spells on the mountain. It turned out that a person who used the mountain river's palm view could attract trouble. The master and disciple of the Xiaoxian temple and the two ancestors of the Linen sect went south on the wind. Zhu Quan went straight to the point. The eldest disciple of the temple master has always liked to say strange things. I've been annoyed by him for a long time, but I can't fight him. However, this person is very good at fighting. It's said that he has learned about 70 to 80% of the Xiaoxian temple's trump cards. You don't have to care about him now. When you reach a higher state, just beat him until he's half dead. Chen Pinggan kept his folding fan and rode his sword to Zhu Quan's side. Zhu Quan handed the little girl to the young sword immortal and teased, "You're a big man and you know how to carry a child. What, did you learn from Jiang Shangzhen? Do you want to use such unconventional tricks to trick women in the Jianghu and on the mountain?" Chen Pinggan sat cross-legged and hugged the little girl in his arms. She was snoring softly. Chen Pinggan smiled. There was a smile on his face, but there were also fragments of sadness in his eyes. When I was young, I carried children, played with them, and took care of them every day. Zhu Quan glanced at the young man. It seemed that it was true. Zhu Quan sat on top of the sea of clouds. He seemed to be hesitating whether or not he should speak. This was an unprecedented matter. Chen Pinggan didn't raise his head, but he seemed to have guessed her thoughts. He said slowly, "I always thought that Lord Zhu was the smartest person in the Skeleton Beach. You were just too lazy to think and act." Zhu Quan nodded, "Then I understand. I believe you." Then, Zhu Quan smiled and said, "However, those half-truths between you and Jiao Cheng made even me, who is considered to be familiar with you, suspicious. What's more, the old monastery head who isn't familiar with you and his eldest disciple who cultivates strength but not heart." Chen Pinggan said, "What I said at the beginning is true. I've prepared for the worst. The little girl died on the ferry. I can't protect her, so I can only take revenge. It's that simple. As for what I said at the end, it's not worth mentioning. Both sides are testing each other. Both sides are trying to see more of each other's thoughts. Jiao Cheng is also worried. He watched me the whole way. In the end, I intentionally let him see. He's afraid that if he loses twice, he won't even have the heart to fight for that little Fengju. In the end, it's just a little game of tug-of-war." Chen Pinggan extended a hand and lightly tapped the blade-strengthening gourd at his waist. The flying sword Chu Yi slowly flew out and hovered on Chen Pinggan's shoulder. It was rare for it to be so docile and obedient. Chen Pinggan said indifferently, "Some of what Jiao Cheng said is naturally true. For example, he thinks that I am the same kind of person as him. He probably thinks that we have relied on gambling time and time again to straighten our backs that were almost crushed and then walk higher and higher. Just like how you respect Jiao Cheng, you can kill him without hesitation. Even if Jiao Cheng only lost a part of his soul, Sect Master Zhu feels that he owes me, Chen Pinggan, a great favor. I won't be blind to his strength just because we're mortal enemies." Zhu Quan grunted, "That's how it should be. Look at things separately and do what you need to do. There are many secrets of the sect that I can't tell you to outsiders. In any case, Jiao Cheng, this ghost, is not simple. For example, if I, Zhu Quan, kill Jiao Cheng one day and smash Jingguan City into smithereens, I'll definitely take out a pot of good wine to toast the foot soldier Jiao Cheng. Then I'll toast the current Jingguan City lord. Finally, I'll toast Jiao Cheng for sharpening our Dao hearts." Chen Pinggan said, "I don't know why, but in this world, there are always people who feel that it's a good thing to bare your fangs at all of elders. There are also so many people who like to talk about things when they need to talk about things, and to talk about things when they need to talk about things." Zhu Quan thought for a moment and slapped heavily on Chen Pinggan's shoulder. "Bring the wine, I want 2 pots. We have to defeat Jiao Cheng. After drinking the wine, I'll say some wonderful words from the bottom of my heart." Chen Pinggan took out 2 pots of wine and gave them to Zhu Quan. He reminded him softly, "When you drink, remember to disperse the smell of alcohol. Otherwise, she might wake up. When she sees me at that time, I'll have to persuade her to go to the skeleton beach. This little girl has been craving my wine for more than a day or two. Sect Master Zhu, it's fine to tell her about the tortoise cream. This little girl is actually very bold and can't hide any evil thoughts. Zhu Quan finished the pot of wine in one gulp. There wasn't a drop left in the pot. However, she raised her head and drank with a bold posture. She wasn't particular at all. At least 20% of the wine was poured. Chen Pinggan said helplessly, Sect Master Zhu, you really have to change your drinking habit. Why do you have to respect the heavens and earth every time you drink? Zhu Quan laughed angrily. You've already given me the wine. What can you do about it? Chen Pinggan looked into the distance and said with a smile, it'll be great if I can be friends with Sect Master Zhu. However, if we do business together, I'll cry myself to death. Zhu Quan regained her composure and became serious. A cultivator's true strength isn't coexisting peacefully with this world. Even if he's a crane in a flock of chickens, he's outstanding. It's how much he's changed the world outside of attaining Tao and immortality. Even to say that the mountain is heartless, whether the result is good or bad, it has nothing to do with one's heart. As long as he's changed the world a lot, he's a powerhouse. We have to admit this. Chen Pinggan nodded. After recognizing them as powerhouses, you still dared to punch them. You're a true powerhouse. Zhu Quan nodded and opened the mud seal. This time, after drinking, she began to be thrifty. She only drank in small sips. It wasn't that she had changed her temperament, but that she had always been like this. When she drank a lot, she drank a lot. When she drank less, she drank slowly. Chen Pinggan turned to Zhu Quan and said with a smile, actually, one of my disciples once said something similar to Sect Master Zhu's. He said that a country's true strength isn't its ability to cover up mistakes, but its ability to correct them. Zhu Quan smiled. I don't care about the matters at the foot of the mountain. In this lifetime, dealing with a single ghost valley and a single Gao Cheng is enough for me to suffer. However, after joining the hemp sect, Du Wenxi and Pang Lanshi will definitely do better than me. You can wait and see. Zhu Quan let out a heavy sigh and asked, there are some things that will make people embarrassed if I say them out loud. Otherwise, I'll be unhappy if I keep it in my heart. Rather than making myself unhappy, I might as well make you unhappy as well. Otherwise, no matter how much wine I drink, it will be useless. You said that you can give Jingguan City an accident. This is true from the beginning. Of course, I can't guess what you'll do, but I don't care. Anyway, you're very steady in doing things. You can be ruthless to others, but the most ruthless to yourself. In this case, you can't blame that Daoist from Little Xiandu Temple. He's worried that you'll become a second Gao Cheng or ally with him. Chen Pinggan nodded. I can understand this seemingly normal thinking, but I don't accept it. Zhu Quan asked straightforwardly, then when Gao Cheng used the matter of the tortoise ointment to blackmail you into taking out this flying sword on your shoulder, were you really deceived by him? Chen Pinggan nodded without hesitation. Yes. So in the future, I'll think more about the spells and divine abilities of an unpolished jade cultivator outside of fighting. Zhu Quan asked, then between Chu Yi and the little girl, you made a decision to abandon Chu Yi and save the little girl? Chen Pinggan nodded again. Otherwise, if the little girl died, where would I find her? Chu Yi, even if Gao Cheng didn't trick me and really had the ability to take the flying sword and throw it directly to Jingguan City, so what? Chen Pinggan narrowed his eyes and smiled strangely. Do you know how much I wanted Gao Cheng to take the flying sword so that I could do something I've never done in all these years of life and death? Something I've never done, not even once. But it's something that the people on and off the mountain like very much, something they all think is right and proper. Chen Pinggan reached out and touched his forehead. After his brows relaxed, he gently handed the little girl in his arms to Zhu Quan and slowly got up. With a shake of his wrist, his sleeves quickly rolled up. Chen Pinggan stood on the sword immortal, standing in the misty sea of clouds. Chen Pinggan's eyes were burning. Gao Cheng really did everything he could. If he really took the flying sword, Chu Yi, I, Chen Pinggan, would have no other choice. This will be an extremely interesting thing. Sect Master Zhu, Guess what I'll do? Zhu Quan stood up with the little girl in his arms and said with a smile, I can't guess. That white-clothed scholar said tirelessly, I'll first have a person called Li he's a martial practitioner of 10th realm, return a favor to me and rush to the skeleton beach. I'll have that disciple of mine whose only nascent soul for the time being come to the skeleton beach to relieve Mister's worries. I'll go ask for help. This is the first time I, Chen Pingan, have asked for help in all these years. I'll ask that old man who's also at the peak of 10th realm to leave the bamboo house and fight for Chen Pingan, who's only half a disciple. Since I've asked for help, I don't need to be shy anymore. I'll finally ask a sword cultivator called Left and Right. Little junior brother is in trouble and is about to die. I beg eldest senior brother to fight. When the time comes, just fight until the world turns upside down. Zhu Quan, the sect master of the hemp sect who dared to attack Jiao Cheng continuously, actually felt a trace of fear. That young man had a pure aura that had nothing to do with good or evil. That person raised a hand high and stomped his foot, stomping the sword immortal with the semi-immortal weapon down. He said indifferently, if Jiao Cheng doesn't die, or if he has one or two more Ascendant Realm backers, it's okay. I don't need to ask for help from anyone. Zhu Quan saw that person laugh loudly and finally say softly, as if he was whispering to someone, I have a sword, come with me. The sword immortal with the semi-immortal weapon originally wanted to rush back, but it didn't dare to get close at all. It hovered far away at the edge of the sea of clouds. But in the end, Zhu Quan saw that person lower his head and look at his rolled-up sleeves, crying silently. Then he slowly raised his left hand and grabbed a sleeve tightly, sobbing, Mr. Qi died because of me. Shouldn't I, Chen Pingan, be the one who shouldn't let him down the most in the world? How can I do this? Anyone can do it, but not Chen Pingan from the clay bottle alley. 5:13. Zhu Quan was silent for a long time, then teased, aren't you still one realm away? Do you really think you're a wind-controlling realm martial artist? Without the sword under his feet, Chen Pingan lightly stomped his feet. The sea of clouds condensed into a solid substance, like a white jade slab. Immortal techniques were indeed mysterious. He smiled, thanks. Zhu Quan smiled and said, after saying it, do you feel better in your heart? Chen Pingan held the back of his head, much better. Zhu Quan shook his head, saying a few words and spitting out a few mouthfuls of foul air can't really do anything. If you continue like this, you'll crush yourself. A person's essence, energy, and spirit are not fist intent. It's not tempered until it's like a mustard seed, and then with a punch, it can collapse the heavens and split the earth. A person's essence, energy, and spirit must be upright and upright. But some words, as an outsider, even if I say something that I think is good, it's actually a bit easy for me to say. Just like this time when you were chasing Jiao Cheng. If it was me, Zhu Quan, with your cultivation level and realm, I would have died dozens of times. Chen Pingan said sincerely, that's why I admire Sect Master Zhu. The Great Tao is difficult, but you walk it magnanimously. There weren't many cultivators who stood at the peak of the mountain who were willing to say that they were wrong and that they owed you a huge favor after doing their best. Zhu Quan pulled out a hand and waved it, less flattery. I don't have many copies of the goddess portrait here. I can give it to you. Chen Pingan smiled, I'll lie down for a while. Sect Master Zhu, don't think I'm being disrespectful. Zhu Quan stretched out a hand, there's no Zhu Quan in the world that a pot of wine can't settle. Chen Pingan was just about to take the wine from the near hand when Zhu Quan glared, it has to be good wine, don't try to fool me with wine from the marketplace. I, Zhu Quan, grew up in the mountains. I can't pretend to be a commoner. I've spent my life with the skeletons of Ghost Valley at my doorstep. I have no homesickness. Chen Pingan was in a bit of a predicament. There weren't many immortal brews in the near home. With Zhu Quan's style of asking for wine, he really couldn't withstand her reaching out her hand a few times. However, he still had to take the wine. Not only that, Chen Pingan directly took out 3 pots of different immortal brews. There was Osmanthus wine from Old Dragon City, Well Immortal wine from Bee Tail Ferry, and Purple Bead Sweat from Bookslip Lake. He gently tossed the pots over one by one. As expected, Zhu Quan first collected 2 pots and placed them in his sleeves. He was a little embarrassed. It's a little too much. I'm embarrassed. Chen Pinggan was lying on the jade-like sea of clouds, just like when he was lying on Kui Dongshan's green bamboo corridor in Cliff Academy. It was not his hometown, but it was also like his hometown. It was indeed tiring to leave the skeleton beach. Zhu Quan sat at the side and gently placed the black-clothed girl beside him. He gently flicked his sleeves, allowing the astral winds to flow around the little girl. She was still sleeping soundly. Only with no worries could she be worry-free. Zhu Quan drank the wine and said worriedly, according to what you said earlier, if Jiao Cheng knew that he was going to die and had the idea of destroying everything, he wouldn't hesitate to drag Jingguan City and Ghost Valley down with him. Not only would Mui Mountain be destroyed, but the skeleton beach would also be destroyed. The swaying river would also be implicated. In addition to the Ghost Valley's baleful aura, it would spread upstream. Who knows how many of those millions of people in those countries would die? Indeed, it's a turn the world upside down. Chen Pinggan said, it's not a if, it's 10,000. Zhu Quan sighed. That's right. Chen Pinggan said slowly, Sect Leader Zhu, do you know the daily flow of people in Mural City, the number of people in Limitless Pass Bazaar, and the number of sects in the Skeleton Beach? Do you know the population of the countries upstream of the swaying river? Zhu Quan was stunned. Why would I know these? I really don't have time to care. I have to cultivate like a tortoise and work hard to be the sect leader. It's very tiring. Chen Pinggan said, when I passed by the Skeleton Beach, I saw it, calculated it, asked about it, and read it in books. So I know. Zhu Quan said helplessly, Chen Pinggan, I don't want to nag you, but what is your brain thinking all day long? Chen Pinggan put his hands behind his head. After leaving Mui Mountain, I saw everyone as Jiao Cheng. After coming to the haunted house in Follower City, I saw everyone as Chen Pinggan. So I'm very tired. Zhu Quan was puzzled. Then why did you come to the North Continent? This is a place where people like to fight to the death. If you're so afraid of death, why don't you come back when you're in a higher realm? Moreover, you have too few means of escaping. You're still a pure martial artist. So you can at most rely on a half-immortal weapon and a square talisman to open up a distance. But let's not talk about us upper 5 realms, Earth immortal chi cultivators. Which one of us can't run thousands of miles in a single breath? Once you can't get close, victory and defeat will be decided quickly. You'll be exhausted to death. Zhu Quan smacked his head. Forget it, pretend I didn't say anything. What a freak. He was wearing a daoist robe, and he wore 2 of them at once. He had a blade-strengthening gourd hanging around his neck and a flying sword that wasn't his natal item. Moreover, he had 2 of them. He could pretend to be a lower 5 realms cultivator or a sword cultivator. He could even pretend to be a 4th realm or 5th realm martial artist. He had so many tricks up his sleeves. Once he fought to the death, he could suddenly close in and kill his master with a punch. With the square talisman and a few sword strikes, ordinary golden core cultivators wouldn't be able to withstand Chen Pinggan's 3 axes. On top of that, this brat could really take a beating. Even Zhu Quan's hands were itching. Why was it that a golden body stage martial artist from the Great Guan dynasty on the ferry hitting Chen Pinggan like a little girl scratching an itch? Chen Pinggan suddenly said, actually, I haven't reached the golden body realm yet. Although I suffered heavy losses in the sea of tribulation clouds in Follower City and almost used up all my good talisman, I still benefited greatly from the tempering of my body. The effect was even better than the bamboo house in my hometown. After all, I was being punched in my own home. It was inevitable that I was aware that the other party wouldn't really kill me. It would only hurt a little, unlike when I was trapped in the sea of tribulation clouds and really died. But even so, I'm still 2 points away from breaking through the bottleneck of the golden body realm. One is that I don't have the courage to become a hero. Another is that I've learned too many different types of martial arts. I can't bite off more than I can chew and inevitably end up in fights. Therefore, I haven't reached the meaning of the explosive spring thunder and the mountain-splitting fist. Zhu Quan asked curiously. You're still a sixth realm martial artist? Chen Pinggan nodded. Zhu Quan laughed angrily. Then why don't all the seventh realm martial artists in the North Continent die? Chen Pinggan thought for a moment. You can't say that. Otherwise, other than Cao Ci, all the martial artists below the peak realm can go die. Zhu Quan took a swig of wine. Cao Ci, that fellow, has even heard of someone like me. What, you even know him? Chen Pinggan grunted and sat up. On the Great Wall of Sword Qi, I lost to him 3 times in a row. Zhu Quan's eyes widened. This time, it was Chen Pinggan's turn to be a little embarrassed. It was a little embarrassing. Chen Pinggan's eyes quickly became resolute. With a smile on his face, he said, it doesn't matter. On the path of martial arts, as long as I'm not 2 realms behind Cao Ci, as long as I'm within a single realm, I have hopes of winning back in this lifetime. Zhu Quan knew that he had misunderstood him. How many young martial artists in the world could make Cao Ci accompany them for 3 consecutive rounds? Just like chess players in the world, who would the city lord of White Emperor City be willing to play a few more rounds with? That Kui Dong, who had deceived his master and destroyed his ancestors. Of course, the more impressive one was the scholar who could make the city lord of White Emperor City leave the city and invite him for a chat. That was Qi Jingchun. The lineage of the literary sage was indeed small in number, but all of them were powerful. Qi Jingchun had withstood that shocking calamity. As the Skeleton Beach was at the southernmost part of the North Continent, and Dali was at the northernmost part of the Aquarius Continent, Zhu Quan had seen some clues back then on Mui Mountain. It was said that the sword cultivator who practiced swordsmanship very late, but his sword qi was extremely long, and he had destroyed countless people. It was said that he had visited the immortal sea, far away from the mortal world. Back then, he had appeared overseas near the territory of the North Continent. At that time, 4 sword immortals had gone there, but after the 3 sword immortals, they all remained silent. Only the unpolished jade sword immortal who had rushed to intercept them, as one of the most outstanding unpolished jade sword immortals in the continent, returned and directly announced to the entire North Continent, don't go to the unpolished jade sword immortal, start as an immortal. There were actually many stories about the lineage of the literary sage. Compared to the lineage of the quasi-sage, which was full of talents and spectacular, the lineage of the literary sage, which was almost extinct, had fewer disciples but more stories. And the North Continent was probably the most favorable place in the world for the lineage of the literary sage. The reason was simple: they could fight. Zhu Quan especially admired left and right. He did not nag, and that explosive temper, TSK, 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 he was even more North Continent than the North Continent. He was a hero, and he was said to have a decent appearance and looked quite refined. But he could fight so well that even the sword immortals of the North Continent felt that it was a pity that such a person was not born in the North Continent, had such a reclusive temperament, and did not like the mortal world. Otherwise, they could spar with each other every day. Zhu Quan chuckled and wiped his mouth. If he could meet him, it would be great. As for the kid beside her, it was fine if he misunderstood and thought that she was laughing at him. Losing 3 rounds in a row was embarrassing, so let him be. Wait a minute. Zhu Quan turned his head stiffly and said fiercely, Chen Pinggan, who are you calling your eldest senior brother? Mr. Qi, which Mr. Qi is he? At first, she was a little stunned by this kid's imposing manner. A 10th realm martial artist who owed money, a student whose disciple was a nascent soul, and a half-master who was at the peak of the 10th realm. This already made her unable to wrap her head around it, and she was even more worried that this kid's state of mind would collapse on the spot. Now that she finally regained her senses, Zhu Quan asked angrily, how is left and right your eldest senior brother? The white-robed scholar blinked his eyes. Sect Master Zhu, what are you talking about? Are you drunk and talking? Zhu Quan stood up, his face full of smiles, and sat down beside Chen Pinggan, whispering, let's make a deal. Later on, let your senior brother, the one who uses a sword, come to my Mui Mountain as a guest. Just say that someone wants to invite him to drink, and if he doesn't want to come to my Mui Mountain, it doesn't matter. I can go to the sea to find him. Later on, Chen Pinggan will act as a go-between and help me book a place. Then I'll invite Pang Shanling to accompany me. I'll stand beside him and let old Pang draw a picture for us. Ayo, I'm really embarrassed. Chen Pinggan rubbed his forehead. Don't say it out loud if you're embarrassed. Zhu Quan was angry. Don't play dumb with me, just say it in one sentence, okay, or very okay. Chen Pinggan rubbed his cheeks with both hands. It was really a headache. What's more, this kind of thing was not something to joke about, so he told the truth. He doesn't think that I'm qualified to be his youngest junior brother. He said this in front of me. That's why I said that I'll beg him, but I might not be able to get it. Zhu Quan swung his palm, and Chen Pinggan's body leaned back. He waited until the arm passed over his head before straightening up. Zhu Quan resentfully retracted his hand and smiled. I'll return your wine to you, okay? Chen Pinggan shook his head. No, really. Zhu Quan slapped his knee. You're so dilly-dallying. No wonder Zhuo refuses to acknowledge you as his youngest junior brother. However, until this moment, Zhu Quan somewhat understood. Why would the young man beside him say that to the head disciple of the monastery master? If Zhuo came to the North Continent, he wouldn't even look at the nascent soul Daoist of the little Xuanju monastery. It wasn't purely because of the disparity between their realms. It was hard to say about other Central Plains sword immortals, but to Zhuo, it wasn't like he wouldn't look at an ascendant realm cultivator. This was also the key reason why North Continent sword cultivators especially respected Zhuo. It was because of his temperament. Zhu Quan looked at the sky and said angrily, No, I have to go. I've said before that we were going to talk about some private matters. I didn't expect that I would stay for so long. If I'm late, I know my two sanctimonious martial uncles very well. As long as a blind man is willing to marry me, they will clap their hands and cheer. Maybe they will squeeze out some tears and then worship that man like a bodhisattva. It's over. When I turn back, the two old things will look at me in the eyes. They will definitely believe that I have messed with you in the Yunhai. Damn it, my reputation will be ruined. The reputation of an old cow eating young grass will definitely spread throughout the Mui Mountain. Before Zhu Quan could even feel that he had been wronged, he saw that the young man was even more flustered than him. Zhu Quan hurriedly stood up, took 2 steps back, and said sternly, I implore Sect Master Zhu to definitely cut off these rumors. Otherwise, I won't go to Mui Mountain in this lifetime. Zhu Quan was puzzled. This young man was fearless. He didn't even frown when he was dealing with Gao Cheng. Why was his face so pale now? Am I so unbearably beautiful? Alright, I'm not that good looking. Zhu Quan hadn't reached out his hand when that little bastard immediately took out a pot of immortal wine. Not only that, he said, I don't have many pots left. I'll owe it to you first. After I finish my journey in the North Continent, I'll definitely bring more good wine for Lord Zhu. Zhu Quan waved his hand. He had already received 3 pots of good wine. He hadn't even finished the pot in his hand. Unexpectedly, the man had already thrown the wine back. Lord Zhu, I'll owe you the rest first. When I have the opportunity to visit Mui Mountain, I'll talk about it. If I really don't have the opportunity to visit Beimen's sect, I'll have someone send the wine to Mui Mountain. Then, he raised his hand and controlled the sword immortal to return to his feet. He flew away on his sword. Zhu Quan gently picked up the black-clothed little girl. He wondered, this young man doesn't lack girls' love. He's so opinionated. He's so young and his skills aren't small. Why is he still like this? Zhu Quan shook his head. He didn't want to think about it. Gao Cheng had suffered such a big loss. Most likely, the Ghost Valley wouldn't be peaceful. She rode the wind to the south. As for some things, it wasn't that she didn't want to say more, but she couldn't. The knot in her heart could only be untied by herself. This was especially true for those who didn't seem to like going down a dead end the most. Yet, they went down a dead end. It was really difficult for immortals to understand. On the ferry, the white-robed scholar carried his sword behind his back and landed on the railing. With a tap of his toes, his snow-white sleeves fluttered. He directly flew back to the room from the window. The window closed automatically. Ding Tong, who was still sitting motionlessly enjoying the scenery, felt her heartstrings relax. She fell backward and fell onto the deck of the boat. The observation deck on the second floor was empty. In fact, all the guests on the second floor had retreated to their rooms. The ferry was even worried that a sword would suddenly strike and then disappear. The steward who sold a stack of bulletin to the little water monster was not much better than Ding Tong. They were brothers in distress. The most terrifying thing was not that the young sword immortal had a high cultivation. It was that his temperament was unpredictable. Otherwise, after a sword strike, life and death would be a pleasant matter. That was to kowtow and beg for mercy, paying with money and life. But when a person who could easily decide the life and death of a person looked at you with a smile like a father looking at his son, and spoke amiably like a brother, his methods were endless. What could you do? What did you dare to do? On Wei Bai's side, the atmosphere was solemn. He had fallen into such a predicament. Logically speaking, the death of a great consecrator of the Iron Mystic Manor was a great loss to the entire Wei clan. Wei Bai should weigh the weight of both sides. However, after discussing with the old nanny in the room, it seemed that they couldn't come up with a suitable countermeasure. It seemed that whatever they did or said, they would make one mistake after another. The consequences would be unpredictable, and they might not even be able to walk down the ferry alive. They wouldn't even have the chance to reach the spring dew garden and stabilize the situation. However, if they didn't do anything, they felt that they were courting death. There was a soft knock on the door. The old nanny's expression was extremely ugly, because she didn't sense any movement at all. The other party had come without a sound. Perhaps the cultivation of the people in the room wasn't high compared to that person, but since they could sit in this room today, none of them were easy to deal with. So they all knew who had come. The young female Xiao of Spring Dew Garden's illumination cottage called Ching Ching steadied her mind. Unwilling to make things difficult for the man she admired, she was about to rise and open the door. Wei Bai sighed. He was the first to rise, motioning for the young woman to not be impulsive. He personally went to open the door and bowed with a scholar. Wei Bai of Iron Shell Manor greets the sword immortal. The white-clothed scholar held a folding fan and smiled as he crossed the threshold. Young Master Wei doesn't need to be so courteous. No discord, no concord. These words caused the eyelids of the people in the room to tremble. Previously, when Wei Bai rose to greet him, they had all stood up. Other than the old nanny of Iron Shell Manor and the young female Xiao of Spring Dew Garden, they all intentionally or unintentionally took a few steps away from the table. They all held their breaths and focused, as though they were facing a great enemy. Wei Bai wanted to close the door softly, but when the white-clothed scholar crossed the threshold, the door closed by itself. Wei Bai withdrew his hand and followed that person to the table. In the end, he sighed in relief. The feeling of having a knife pressed against one's heart was the most unbearable. After the white-clothed scholar sat down, he picked up a teacup that was still facing down and poured himself a cup of tea. The tea from the second floor's house does taste better. After Wei Bai sat down, the old nanny stood behind him. Only the young female Xiao of Spring Dew Garden sat down with Wei Bai. The white-clothed scholar casually pointed at someone. "I'll have to trouble you to call the person in charge of the ferry over." The person hurriedly bowed and said that he did not dare. He immediately went out to call for the person. The door closed softly. There was an unbearable silence in the room. Moments later, the white-clothed scholar said with a smile, "On my trip back, I happened to see Senior walking in the wilderness after leaving the ferry." Wei Bai understood and heaved a sigh of relief. Master Liao was able to spar with Senior Sword Immortal to his heart's content. Perhaps after returning to Iron Shell Manor and recuperating, he will be able to break through the bottleneck and improve further. That young female Xiao of Night Illumination Cottage was perhaps the last person in the room to understand the crux of the matter. The others only understood the subtleties of this conversation a little later than Wei Bai. They were even more impressed with Wei Bai. For some reason, that sword immortal had given Iron Shell Manor's Weisha a way out. But at the same time, it was an invisible deterrent. It was another way of being overbearing. "I killed your Golden Body Realm warrior consecrator with one punch." I still want to come to your room to drink tea. Wei Bai and Iron Shell Manor, do you want to settle the score with me? But at the same time, if Iron Shell Manor was willing to settle the matter peacefully, Wei Bai chose to walk down the path. Not only did he swallow the loss of teeth and blood, he also completely accepted the other's roundabout way of reaching for a yard after taking an inch. Then there was a light knock on the door. That person brought the ferry steward into the room. The old nanny raised an eyebrow. Good fellow. This young sword immortal had calculated it. It turned out that those words were meant for the young master as well as for the people on the ferry. As long as the young master was willing to settle the matter peacefully, then the young sword immortal's ear-piercing words from before would become somewhat sincere. After all, if Iron Shell Manor had not been beaten to death by the Golden Body Realm warrior of Liao clan, it would only be a joke. But if the ferry steward took the initiative to help explain, Iron Shell Manor's reputation would be better. Of course, the young master could also take the initiative to look for the ferry steward and hint to him. The steward would definitely be willing to do Iron Shell Manor a favor. But in that case, the young master would be even more worried. A small matter was a small matter. But if the young master could see the bigger picture and see the bigger picture, then he would be able to understand the third layer of meaning. In a fight, the Golden Body Realm warrior of your clan can be dealt with one punch from me. And I'm also familiar with the ways of the Imperial Court. Even if I give you face, Wei Bai, you can't take it. Do you really have the right to fall out with me, a foreign sword immortal? Iron Shell Manor might not be afraid of a sword cultivator who only knew how to fight and kill. In the North Continent, as long as one had money, one could invite a golden core sword immortal down the mountain to practice the sword. With enough money, one could even invite a nascent soul sword immortal. But this young sword immortal who liked to wear 2 robes was very smart. The old lady was a demonic cultivator. In her eyes, there was no difference between good and bad. In the world, there was only the difference between the strong and the weak. And the strong were divided into 2 types. One type was destined not to be provoked. The other type was one that could be provoked but was best not to. The former was naturally stronger, but the latter could become the former at any time. Sometimes, it could even be harder to deal with. In the end, Iron Shell Manor was still a faction at the foot of the mountain of a secular dynasty. They were abnormally familiar with the rules of the Imperial Court. The more so, it was actually not difficult to deal with those straightforward cultivators on the mountain, especially those who were straightforward. The difficult ones were those immortal genealogists who were even more scheming than the officials. Among the 3 great clans of the Great Guan dynasty, the Wei clan had precisely because of their prestigious family background. Were there any lack of potential scholars and generals? There were also quite a few. Many of the descendants of the great clans who were not acclimatized to the environment were fine as officials in the capital. But once they were sent out to become officials, such as county magistrates or county magistrates, those old foxes in the imperial court would use all kinds of obscure and disgusting ways to manipulate them. They would play around in circles and cut their flesh with blunt knives. Therefore, Iron Shell Manor spared no effort in protecting Wei by all these years. They were even a little apprehensive, afraid that the little young master would suddenly die one day and not even be able to find an enemy after that. But every time the little young master went out in the past, it was actually the safest. The route was fixed, the retainers followed, and the immortals provided support. For this reason, they had also lured out many deeply hidden enemy factions. Following the clues, Iron Shell Manor took the opportunity to clean up many hidden dangers. There were those in the Imperial Court, the mountains, and the Jianghu. But this time, it was really a huge accident. Currently, the ferry was still in the territory of a vassal state of the Great Guan dynasty, but the other party did not even give face to Iron Shell Manor and Spring Dew Garden. Before that person acted, there were so many whispers. Even if they did not know the noble identity of the little young master, they should have understood by now. The white-robed scholar pointed at the table with his folding fan. Chief steward of the ferry, we are people who have done 2 business deals before. Why are you so polite? Sit, drink tea. The white-robed scholar casually swiped with his folding fan, and the teacup slid to the side of the table in front of the steward. Half of the teacup was outside the table. It shook slightly, but did not fall. Then, he raised the teapot. The steward hurriedly took 2 steps forward and grabbed the teacup with both hands. He bent down and handed over the teacup with both hands. He waited for the white-robed sword immortal to pour the tea before sitting down. From beginning to end, he did not say a single extra word of flattery. Summer had not yet arrived, but his ferry was already in troubled times. The so-called 2 business deals, one was to pay to ride the ferry, and the other was naturally to buy and sell the court newspaper. The white-robed scholar raised the teacup and took a leisurely sip. He gently placed it on the table and leaned back on the chair. He opened his folding fan and gently fanned it. Only then did Wei Bai raise his cup and drink it quickly. The steward followed behind Wei Bai and slowly drank the tea. Then, he held the cup with both hands without putting it down. The white-robed scholar smiled. There are some misunderstandings. Let's talk it out. Outside, harmony breeds wealth. Wei Bai poured himself a cup of tea and filled it to the brim. He held the cup with one hand and supported it with the other as he nodded with a smile. It's rare for Senior Sword Immortal to travel the world. This time, it was our Iron Mantis manner that offended Senior Sword Immortal. The white-robed scholar nodded. Wei Bai drank it in one gulp. Fine sweat seeped out of the steward's forehead. As a sea-viewing cultivator, he felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. The white-robed scholar turned to look at the young female cultivator. This fairy is? Wei Bai put down the teacup and smiled. She is the only daughter of Immortal Tang of the Spring Dew Gardens illuminated night cottage, Tang Qingqing. The white-robed scholar smiled. Immortal Tang must be the first person who wanted to open the door to welcome the guest. Young Master Wei, you must live up to the kindness of a beauty. Wei Bai smiled and nodded. I am just waiting for the elders of both sides to agree. The white-robed scholar nodded and said with a smile, but I think the cottage side will be fine. Who doesn't like a son-in-law like young Master Wei? Only General Wei will have a hard time. After all, there are some differences on the mountain. Of course, it still depends on fate. It is not good to break up a pair of mandarin ducks. A melon twisted by force will not be sweet. Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief again. That Tang Qingqing was actually somewhat grateful. Those cultivators who were on good terms with the Iron Shell Manor or the Spring Dew Garden standing in the room were somewhat shrouded in mist. Other than at the beginning, the onlookers could still feel a faint murderous intent. Now, it seemed like they were here to chat. The white-robed scholar suddenly said, Immortal Tang, you should know Senior Song Lanxiao, right? Tang Qingqing hurriedly said, of course. Ship owner Song is my father's senior brother. They are both cultivators of the Spring Dew Gardens land generation. The white-robed scholar smiled and said, that's good. I've taken Senior Song's ferry before, and we hit it off very well. We can be considered friends despite our age difference. It seems that I'll have to trouble Illumination Night Herb Hall on this trip to Spring Dew Garden. Tang Qingqing smiled sweetly. It is our honor that Sword Immortal Senior can come to the cottage. Even Wei Bai was a little jealous of Tang Qingqing's relationship with him. The white-robed scholar suddenly asked, young Master Wei, the young Sword Immortal who flew by on the sword said some strange things that did not make any sense. He even wanted to invite me to tea. What is his name? Wei Bai said, if I am not wrong, he should be the junior granduncle of the Golden Crow Palace, Liu Jiqing, Sword Immortal Liu. Tang Qingqing nodded and said with a smile, every few years, this Sword Immortal Liu of Gold Crow Palace would come to our Spring Dew Garden to drink the water and make tea. The white-robed scholar suddenly understood, I saw this part in the book Spring Dew in Winter in the Spring Dew Garden. So this Sword Immortal is Liu Jiqing from the Golden Crow Palace. I have heard of you for a long time. If I had known, I would have been thick-skinned enough to say hello to Sword Immortal Liu. When we go to the Spring Dew Garden, it will help me earn some reputation. Wei Bai smiled as usual. The corner of the old nanny's mouth twitched slightly. The cup of tea in her hand that she had not dared to drink was not bitter, but the ferry manager felt sad. Sword Immortal Master, you cut down Lei Yun from the Golden Crow Palace with one sword, and Liu Jiqing still invited you to tea. Do you need this reputation? Can't we be a bit more open-minded? Please, Sword Immortal Master, give us a straightforward answer and stop tormenting us like this. The white-robed scholar turned his head. Old woman, you seem to think that I am not qualified to drink tea with Sword Immortal Liu? The old woman said with a fake smile, I wouldn't dare. Two sword immortals, sitting by a spring in the forest, drinking tea. It is a beautiful story. That little book from the Spring Dew Garden can be reprinted this year. The white-robed scholar maintained his smiling posture. The old woman's face became more and more stiff. The white-robed scholar suddenly narrowed his eyes and said, I heard that in the Yamashita dynasty, there is a saying that the servant dies when the master is humiliated. The old woman's face was tense. The white-robed scholar said again, as for the beautiful story, I also heard that there is one in the Great Guan dynasty. Back then, young Master Wei was admiring the snow lake and saw a handsome young man walking across an arch bridge. Young Master Wei asked her if she was willing to become an immortal couple with that young man, saying that a gentleman has the beauty to fulfill his wish. The servant was speechless. A moment later, an old woman swept across the lake with a box and presented it to the young man. Old woman, may I ask what is in the box? I come from a poor place, so I am very curious. I wonder what valuable item could make a young man so moved. The old woman was already prepared for the worst. She would fight to the death and drag down the young master of the Ironwall Manor and Tang Qingqing of the Spring Dew Garden with her. When the time came, she wanted to see how this young sword immortal would drink tea with Liu Jiqing, but the white-robed scholar had already turned his head. No wonder this temple is filled with incense. Wei Bai's body was tense. He squeezed out a smile and said, I have embarrassed myself in front of Senior Sword Immortal. The white-robed scholar slowly stood up. In the end, he only patted the shoulder of the ferry manager with his folding fan. Then, when he brushed past him, don't have a third transaction. It is easy to see people when you walk at night. Tang Qingqing was stunned. Wasn't it easy to see ghosts? The white-robed scholar walked straight to the door. He raised his arm and waved the folded fan in his hand. There is no need to send me off. The door opened and closed by itself. Wei Bai smiled bitterly. Would ghosts see people when they walk at night? After a long silence, Wei Bai roughly confirmed that the person could make a round trip on the ferry. He smiled and said to the old woman, Don't mind. The experts on the mountain have no taboos. We can't be envious. The old woman smiled and nodded. Wei Bai sneered in his heart. If you don't mind, I don't care if it's true or not. But I mind it very much. Just now, that faint killing intent that you, old woman, revealed might have been targeted at that young sword immortal. But I, Wei Bai, am not stupid. Whether a dog bites a person or a person beats a dog, how could it compare to the fierceness of a dog biting another dog to death? The white-robed scholar returned to his room. He began the 6-step stump walk. He suddenly stopped and came to the window. As night fell, he lightly leapt onto the railing of the boat and slowly walked. He walked like this for an entire night. When the sun rose out of the sea, Chen Pingan stopped at the railing of the boat. He raised his eyes and gazed into the distance. Dressed in a snow-white robe, he bathed in the morning glow. He was like a golden deity of the world. At dusk, at the entrance of a shop in Dragon Rider Alley of Longspring County, a charcoal-black girl sat at the entrance with a small stool in her hands. Sharu, who was inside the shop, would occasionally glance at the activity outside. Pei Qian would often sit at the entrance and eat melon seeds. Sharu knew that it was because he missed her master. After Chen Pingan went to the North Continent from the ferry of Oxhorn Mountain, Zhu Lian had been keeping an eye on the school for about 10 years. Pei Qian had finally gotten used to his life as a student there and no longer thought of skipping classes. But even so, he did not stop. Zhu Lian once went to the school to ask the teacher about the recent situation. He was both happy and worried. He was happy because Pei Qian did not fight with anyone in the school, not even scolding them. He was worried because the old teachers were also helpless against Pei Qian. The little girl did not have the slightest respect for the books of the saints. During class, she would meticulously sit by the window and silently draw little figures on the corners of every page of the book. After class, She would flip through the books. One of the old teachers had gotten the news from somewhere and flipped through all of Pei Qian's books. In the end, he did not miss a single page. The little figures were crudely drawn. A circle was the head, and the 5 little branches should be the body and 4 limbs. After closing the book, when he looked at the corner of the book, it was either the little figure practicing boxing or the little figure drawing an extra line. It should be considered sword practice. The old teacher did not know whether to laugh or cry at that time, but he did not immediately get angry. He began to ask Pei Qian about her homework and asked her to recite passages from the books. He did not expect the little girl to be able to recite them word for word. The old teacher did not ask further, but only reminded her not to draw nonsense on the books of the saints. Later on, the little girl bought some books from somewhere outside the school. Her homework was neither good nor bad, and she was still diligent in drawing. After class, she would occasionally go to the bottom of the tree alone to catch an ant and place it on a small piece of snow-white rice paper. With one arm blocking the front of the table and the other holding a brush, she would draw horizontal and vertical lines on the paper, blocking the escape route of the ant. She was able to draw a full piece of rice paper, just like a maze. The pitiful ant was just going around in circles inside the maze. Because the young master of the Chen family of Dragon Tail Creek had instructed all the teachers and teachers that they only needed to treat Pei Qian as an ordinary child of Longquan County, all the young and old students in the school only knew of this little charcoal. She lived at the Sway Sway shop in the Riding Dragon Alley. She would only speak if she had a question or answer with a teacher. Every day in the school, she almost never spoke to anyone. She would go to and from school twice in the morning and evening, and she liked to walk on the stairs above the Riding Dragon Alley. She also liked to walk sideways. In short, she was an especially strange fellow. Her schoolmates were not too close to her. As they spent more time together in the school, some news spread that this little charcoal girl was a moneygrubber. She would do business with people at the Sway Sway shop every day, helping the shop earn money. There were also some young and old students who swore that they had seen this little charcoal with their own eyes. She liked to compete with the big white goose in the alley. There were also some young and old students from the neighboring Riding Dragon Alley who said that Pei Qian would purposely imitate the crow of a rooster every morning when they went to school. She was very noisy and very bad. There were also people who said that after Pei Qian bullied the big white goose, she would fight with the big rooster in the northernmost part of the town. She would even shout something like "Eat my ground whirlwind kick," or squat on the ground and punch the big rooster. Was she crazy? After Zhu Lian went to the school once, he came back to the shop and had a chat with Pei Qian. Pei Qian finally stopped drawing little people in her books, and also stopped building houses for ants on rice paper. She just went to a secluded corner near the Riding Dragon Alley after school and dipped some mud in water. She would make little mud men by herself, arrange the troops, and command both sides to fight each other. She made 30 to 40 little mud men, and after every fight, she would beat the gong to retreat and hide those little people nearby. When Sharu saw this, she told Zhu Lian in private. Zhu Lian told her not to worry about it. However, there were 2 things that happened later. The first thing was that after Pei Qian finished copying books one day, she excitedly ran off to become the great general of the autumn troops on the battlefield. In the end, she came back very quickly. When Sharu asked, Pei Qian was unhappy. She stood on the stool behind the counter and put her head on the counter. She said that because of the heavy rain a few days ago, the soldiers of both armies died in battle. This made Sharu a little worried. With Pei Qian's shrewdness, how could she let her family's belongings be damaged by the rain? However, in the end, Zhu Lian still said to let her be. However, the second thing made Zhu Lian frown. After receiving news from Sharu, he specially made a trip from Luopo Mountain to Riding Dragon Alley. Sharu told him that one day after school, Pei Qian dragged a dead big white goose by its neck and carried it back to the shop in Riding Dragon Alley. She then buried the big white goose in an unknown place. At that time, Pei Qian was in her room copying books by herself. Zhu Lian stood at the entrance of the shop. Sharu said that Pei Qian wasn't willing to say anything. She was the one who found out the news herself. On the way back from school, Pei Qian was stopped by a commoner woman. She said that Pei Qian must have killed the white goose at home and scolded him. At first, Pei Qian said that it wasn't her. The woman even attacked him. After Pei Qian dodged, he only said that it wasn't her. In the end, Pei Qian took out a bag of his private money and gave the woman the 2 pieces of silver and all the copper coins that he had painstakingly saved up. He said that she could buy the dead white goose, but the goose wasn't killed by her. Sharu was very worried and asked Zhu Lian if she should have a heart-to-heart talk with Pei Qian. At that time, Zhu Lian's back was facing the counter and he was facing the road of Riding Dragon Alley. He said that it wasn't that they couldn't talk, but it was useless. With Pei Qian's personality, he would only listen to someone. It wasn't like Sharu didn't know. Sharu came up with an idea. She said that she would talk to the woman and use some methods to find out the mischievous child at the school and make both parties apologize to Pei Qian. In the end, Zhu Lian, who was always smiling, actually cursed. What was the use? Was it just a simple matter? Sharu was so scared that her face turned pale. However, in the end, Zhu Lian stood at the door for a long time and quietly returned to Luopo Mountain without doing anything. After that, Pei Qian didn't have anything to worry about. He obediently went to the school and listened to the teacher's lectures. He left early and returned late, punctual. Then, when he was free, he would help with the shop's business, copying books, practicing her crazy demon sword technique. However, this kind of peace made Sharu even more worried. Sharu would rather that Pei Qian had slapped that commoner woman or quarreled with some old teacher at the school. But Pei Qian didn't have any. At that moment, Sharu realized that it wasn't just that Chen Pinggan wasn't at Luopo Mountain. There were 2 Luopo Mountains. And whether he was by Pei Qian's side or not, there were 2 Pei Qians. Fortunately, Pei Qian would still be like today, sitting alone at the door of the shop with a wooden stool and eating melon seeds. He would ramble on, looking up at the end of the alley from time to time. At this time, Sharu would find Pei Qian more familiar. On this day, Pei Qian had just walked back to the backyard of the shop with a wooden stool, intending to practice the crazy demon sword technique that was almost perfect. In the end, he heard old chef shouting from the shop in front of him, money loser, come out quickly." Pei Qian held the mountain traveling staff and ran out angrily. "Old chef, are you looking for a beating?" When Pei Qian walked to the front of the shop, he saw a little girl standing next to old chef with her arms crossed. She stood on the threshold with a sullen face and looked at Pei Qian. Pei Qian was stunned and said in all seriousness, "Who is this?" "Old chef, that illegitimate daughter of yours who had wandered about outside. I finally found her for you." Zhu Lian scolded him and patted the head of the little girl standing on the threshold. "Her name is Zhu Mili. Your master sent her here from the North Continent." Pei Qian clapped his hands, his eyes shining. "Master is really amazing. Now, not only can he pick up money, but he can also pick up girls." The little girl in black frowned and tilted her head, squinting her eyes as she looked at the little charcoal that wasn't too tall. Pei Qian widened his eyes, then smiled and said, "I'll treat you to spicy boiled fish tonight, okay?" After saying that, Pei Qian used one hand as a knife and the other as a chopping board. He raised and lowered his hand back and forth, so fast that it was dazzling. Then, he made a dur-dur-dur sound from his mouth. After he finished, he took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "My knife technique is the second best in the world, only slightly inferior to my master." Then, she spread her hands. "Have you eaten such a big fish? Have you eaten such a big crab?" Zhu Mili didn't dare to cross her arms again. She frowned, her face full of sweat, and her eyes quickly darted around. Sharu smiled. She was indeed a little fish monster. Zhu Mili had an idea. She said awkwardly in Dallas official language, "Your master asked me to help pass a message. He said that he misses you very much." Pei Qian's eyes suddenly lit up. The little girl in black hurriedly jumped down the threshold, a little scared. Pei Qian picked up the walking stick that was leaning against his shoulder again and swaggered to the threshold. He looked at the little girl in black with a kind expression. He reached out his hand to stroke her little head and said with a smile, "You're not tall, you're just a short winter melon. It's all right, I won't look down on you." I, Pei Qian, As the first disciple of my master, I'm not the kind of person who judges people by their appearance. Ju Mili had learned Dalis official language along the way. Although she couldn't speak fluently, she could understand. Zhu Lian smiled. Ju Mili will be handed over to you in the future. This is the young master's idea. What do you think? If you don't like it, I'll take Ju Mili back to Luopa Mountain. Pei Qian twitched the corner of his mouth and squinted at the old chef. The world is big. Of course, my master is the most important. In the future, I'll take care of this short winter melon. I'll take her to eat every meal. Ju Mili immediately shouted, as long as we don't eat fish, anything is fine. Pei Qian smiled and rubbed the little girl in black's head. Good girl. Zhu Lian left. Sharu leaned on the counter and laughed to herself. After that, there was a little girl in black in the shop of Dragon Rider Alley. Then the dog would often come. Every day when the school was about to end, Ju Mili would squat at the gate with the dog to welcome Pei Qian back to Dragon Rider Alley. One day, Pei Qian ran out and saw Ju Mili, who was holding a walking stick, and the dog lying on the ground. Pei Qian squatted down, grabbed the dog's mouth, and twisted it. Tell me, did anyone bully little Winter Melon today? The dog, who had become a demon, wanted to die. What should I say? Pei Qian shook his wrist and turned the dog's head in another direction. You don't want to talk? Do you want to rebel? Ju Mili said timidly, Senior sister, no one bullied me. Pei Qian nodded, loosened his hand, and slapped the dog's head. How did you become the left protector of the Riding Dragon Alley? If you don't know how to improve yourself, it's useless. The Riding Dragon Alley only has the right protector. Ju Mili immediately stood up straight, tiptoed, and firmly grasped the walking stick with both hands. They ran through the streets and alleys, ran back to Dragon Rider Alley, and ran down the stairs. As a result, a man in white descended from the sky, his sleeves billowing, making a sound. He landed on the ground with one arm in front of him, and two fingers of one hand pointing to the sky. If you want to pass through, pay the toll. The dog turned around and ran away with its tail between its legs. Ju Mili was a little nervous. She pulled Pei Qian's sleeve. Senior sister, who is that? He's so fierce. She didn't think that the man was a bad guy. She just thought that there was something wrong with his head and he was tall. If he hurt her and her senior sister with his great strength, there would be no way to reason with him. But she saw Pei Qian's serious face. Pei Qian said slowly, he's a famous devil in Jianghu. He's very tricky. I don't know how many top masters in Jianghu have been defeated by him. It's difficult for me to deal with him. You stand behind me. Don't worry. This Dragon Rider Alley is under my protection. I'll take his head. Ju Mili nodded hard, wiped the sweat on her forehead, and stepped back. Then she saw Pei Qian jump down with his hand and land right next to the man in white. Then he swept out the walking stick. Ju Mili stared with her eyes wide open. What was going on? The walking stick was a little slow. It was as slow as ants moving their nest. The man in white leaned back slowly, and his two snow-white sleeves were slowly lifted up, like two pieces of paper slowly spreading out. Just in time to avoid the sweep of the mountain walking staff. Then they fought back and forth, but it was still so slow. Ju Mili felt that she could finish a trip in the Dragon Rider Alley. Ju Mili's eyebrows were almost squeezed together. She really didn't understand. In the end, Pei Qian and the handsome but mentally ill man in white stopped almost at the same time. They both made a gesture of gathering qi in their lower abdomen. Pei Qian said, Master, you can block the 6 moves of my crazy devil sword art. It's more than enough to beat all the masters in Jianghu. The man in white also nodded, it's true. Ju Mili was a little confused and scratched her head. Then the man in white smiled brightly, you must be Ju Mili. My name is Kui Dongshan. You can call me senior brother. Ju Mili quickly got up and ran down the stairs. She stretched her neck and looked at the man who called himself Kui Dongshan. Chen Pinggan said you were a bully. I don't think so. The man waved his sleeves and pinched his thumb and middle finger together. He covered his face with one hand and said shyly, my master is the best at joking. Ju Mili's mouth twitched and she turned to look at Pei Qian. Pei Qian kicked Kui Dongshan's leg. Be serious. Don't embarrass my master. Kui Dongshan coughed and squatted down. He smiled and said, just stand. Zhu Mili blinked her eyes. The man stretched out a finger and gently pressed between her eyebrows. Zhu Mili felt a little dizzy and sleepy. After a long time, Zhu Mili felt a tingling pain between her eyebrows. Then she felt nothing. The man had stood up and gently patted Zhu Mili's head. He smiled and said, it's all right. Let's go back to the shop. Pei Qian frowned and said, you have to be careful. This is what my master told you. Kui Dongshan put his hands behind his back and stood sideways with two little girls. He said helplessly, I know. Let's go. In front of the Dragon Rider alley, the two little girls swaggered as if they were cut from the same cloth. This was called walking arrogantly and causing demons to panic. Pei Qian was really nice to Zhu Mili. He even took out a talisman that he treasured. He spat on it and put it on Zhu Mili's forehead. Kui Dongshan walked slowly behind the two little girls. He looked at them and smiled. The brilliance of the sun and the moon. The light of a grain of rice. Then Kui Dongshan gently raised his hand behind his back. Between his two fingers, he pinched a soul remnant that was as black as ink. Kui Dongshan twitched the corner of his mouth. I'm sorry. It's your bad luck to meet me, Kui Dongshan. Spring Dew Garden Ferry. After Song Lanxiao, who was in charge of the sect's ferry, received Tang Qingqing's message from the Ancestral Master Hall, the nascent Soul Realm Patriarchs and the Ancestral Master Hall unanimously decided that he did not need to take care of the ferry for the time being. He was to stay in the Spring Dew Garden and personally receive the young sword immortal from the Skeleton Beach until the end of the farewell spring banquet. If the young sword immortal surnamed Chen was still willing to stay in the Spring Dew Garden to enjoy the scenery, it would naturally be better. Song Lanxiao had been waiting at the ferry for nearly 2 hours, but he was still in a good mood. He greeted familiar faces with a more sincere smile. The ferry stewards in the world were all pitiful people on the path of cultivation. They were not abandoned by their sect, and Song Lanxiao was no exception. Other than his master, the other elders and guests in the Ancestral Master Hall, even though most of them were at the same level as Song Lanxiao, and some of them were only one generation higher than him and had changed the word Lan to Zhu in their names, they really did not like him. Firstly, they were from different sects. Secondly, the annual income from the ferry, as well as the rare flowers and precious wood from the Jiamu mountain range, had never been in his hands. On the ferry, there would be direct disciples of the Ancestral Master Hall in charge of dealing with the various immortal forces. He only received a small share of the leftovers as the owner of the ferry. If there were any accidents, the Ancestral Master Hall would hold him accountable. He would not be miserable, but he would not have many days of peace. A ferry slowly docked at the unusually bustling Spring Dew Gardens Talisman water crossing. Ferries of all sizes from all over the North Continent discovered something strange. None of the passengers on the ferry disembarked with the wind, and none of them leaped down. Without exception, all of them walked down the ferry with their legs. Not only that, after disembarking, they all looked as if they had just escaped death. Chen Pinggan walked down the ferry. Wei Yibai and Tang Qingqing from the Iron Wall Manor followed behind, but they were dozens of steps away. Seeing the increasingly friendly Song Lanxiao, Chen Pinggan smiled as he was led by the Spring Dew Gardens Golden Elixir cultivator to a beautiful place in the Jiamu mountain range. There was a mansion there that was specially built to entertain distinguished guests. Rows of quaint mansions were situated in a sea of bamboo. The two of them sat on a small talisman boat and headed to their residence. The sea of bamboo stretched on and on. It was emerald green and filled with spiritual energy. It made one feel relaxed and happy. The boat's wormwood boatman was a young woman. On the boat, there was a complete tea set. She knelt at one end of the boat and brewed tea skillfully. Song Lanxiao and Chen Pinggan drank tea and enjoyed the scenery together. Song Lanxiao introduced the various shops, mountain peaks, and scenic spots along the way. The Jiamu mountain range covered a vast area. The talisman boat sailed for about an hour before entering the Sea of Bamboo, where spiritual energy was far superior to other places. After another 15 minutes, It stopped beside a pavilion in the sea of bamboo on the mountain peak. This time, Chen Pinggan did not carry a bamboo box or wear a bamboo hat. He did not hold a mountain traversing staff in his hand. He had even put away his sword Immortal. He only had the blade-strengthening gourd hanging from his waist and a jade bamboo folding fan in his hand. His white robes fluttered in the wind, and he looked very elegant. The Spring Dew Garden female boatman, who did not have a high aptitude for cultivation, stood beside the boat. She smiled sweetly, but on the way, other than pouring tea, she did not say anything else. Chen Pinggan approached and pinched a snowflake between his 2 fingers. The female cultivator seemed to be surprised. She hesitated for a moment and then hurriedly extended her hand. Chen Pinggan released his fingers and gently dropped the snowflake into her palm. He then thanked her. Song Lanxiao saw that the woman seemed to be a little nervous. He smiled and said, "Just accept it. The rigid rules of other places do not apply here in the Sea of Bamboo." When Chen Pinggan and Song Lanxiao walked towards the residence, he asked doubtfully, "Senior Song, did I break the rules of the Spring Dew Garden?" Song Lanxiao shook his head and smiled. The other residences in the Jiamu mountain range that entertain guests have rules. They do not allow boatmen to take tips from guests. But here in the Sea of Bamboo, they are free to do as they please. If Sir Chen is willing, you can even give a small sum of money. And it will definitely all be from the boatman's private stash. The Spring Dew Garden will definitely not take a single cent. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Things like puffing oneself up at one's own cost can't be done." The farewell spring feast would be held 3 days later. It was just before the summer solstice. And Song Lanxiao said that after summer, there would be another deer antler feast. It was just that it would not be as large as the previous market. So now, there were more ferries than visitors. After all, the Spring Dew Garden valued spring. The 2 slowly walked through the bamboo forest's small path. Then, they came to a secluded residence with a plaque that said Hibernation Awakening. It had 3 courtyards. The Spring Dew Garden had 6 residences named after the 6 solar terms of spring. They were the most elegant. 3 of them were located in the Sea of Bamboo. However, the Qingming residence was not something that most guests were willing to stay in. After all, the name was not particularly auspicious. But the Daoist experts who visited the Spring Dew Garden liked to stay in this residence. In fact, every time before and after the farewell spring feast, the Spring Dew Garden's ancestral hall would have a headache over the ownership of these 6 residences. They would not be given to anyone. If they were not careful, it would cause resentment and trouble. In fact, there was the most prestigious beginning of spring residence. A nascent soul-esteemed guest had just left 2 days ago. It was temporarily empty. Although it was very popular, it was not impossible for it to be given to the young sword Immortal. However, after a discussion, the ancestral hall felt that this residence was too close to the Jade Luster Cliff. Furthermore, it was inappropriate for the Golden Crow Hall's junior martial granduncle to stay there and brew tea. If a fight really broke out, a good thing would turn into a disaster. During the discussion, a large group of arrogant elders and consecrators seriously asked for Song Lanxiao's opinion. This made Song Lanxiao feel a little elated. However, he was an old golden core after all. He did not reveal any smug expression. Instead, he was more respectful than before. His response was watertight. The most important thing on the mountain was to be a steady stream. There were too many people who were pleased with themselves today and disappointed tomorrow. Song Lanxiao entered the Hibernation Awakening residence. However, he did not stay for long and soon left. There were 2 young female cultivators with outstanding looks in the residence. One of them was actually the direct disciple of a golden core cultivator from the Spring Dew Garden. They were responsible for serving as the guests' temporary maids. This made Chen Pinggan feel very awkward. When he sent Song Lanxiao to the door, he directly asked if he could dismiss the 2 girls. Song Lanxiao chuckled and said, "Young Master Chen, you are our Spring Dew Garden's most esteemed guest. Of course you can do that. However, those 2 girls will definitely be punished later." Chen Pinggan sighed and waved his folding fan. He did not say anything else. Song Lanxiao said softly, "Our ancestral master originally wanted to personally welcome young Master Chen. However, there was an accident during the preparation of the Farewell of Spring feast. She had to personally organize it. Moreover, our ancestral master is very meticulous and has a temper. She really can't leave. Thus, I can only apologize to young Master Chen." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Ancestral Master Tan is too courteous." After Song Lanxiao left, Chen Pinggan did not immediately return to the residence after Song Lanxiao disappeared at the end of the bamboo forest path. Instead, he began to wander around. When Chen Pinggan returned to the residence, he saw Liu Jiqing of the Golden Crow Palace standing at the entrance. He had the appearance of a young man with a golden hairpin on his head. Two young female cultivators stood beside him. Their gazes were gentle. It was not only the kind of admiration that female cultivators had for sword immortals, but also the kind of admiration that women had for handsome men. Chen Pinggan smiled. Comparisons were odious. If that student of his was standing here, these two female cultivators of the Spring Dew Garden would probably not have any respect for sword immortal Liu. 5:14. Liu Jiqing asked, "Do you want to drink tea at my Jade Cliff?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and smiled. "Sword immortal Liu seems to have misunderstood me. I'm afraid I'll be punished if I don't drink tea at Jade Cliff." Liu Jiqing said, "I like the spring at Jade Cliff more than the thunderclouds at Golden Crow Palace." Chen Pinggan said, "That's good. Are we going there on foot or on the wind?" Liu Jiqing smiled. "Up to you." Chen Pinggan looked at the Golden Core Direct Disciple Spring Dew Garden female cultivator. "I'll have to trouble you to take out your talisman boat and give us a ride." Of course, the beautiful woman had no objections. Traveling to Jade Cliff with Liu Zhenxian on a boat was an honor she couldn't ask for more. Moreover, the guest before her was an honored guest of Spring Dew Garden. Even though only Song Lanxiao, a Jindan martial uncle from another branch, had come out to greet him, which wasn't as grand as Liu Zhenxian's when he first entered the mountain, the fact that he was able to stay here meant that he was no ordinary person. Jade Cliff wasn't within the bamboo forest boundary. Spring Dew Garden's ancestral hall did this on purpose to prevent conflict between two sword immortals. The talisman boat took off into the distance. The bamboo forest beneath their feet was as vast as a sea of green clouds. The mountain breeze blew and swayed the leaves, creating a beautiful scene. This time, the female cultivator didn't brew tea for the guest. She was showing off her tea ceremony in front of sword immortal Liu. When they arrived at Jade Cliff, Liu Jiqing and Chen Pinggan got off the boat. Chen Pinggan asked curiously, "Sword immortal Liu, don't you know the rules here?" Liu Jiqing was confused. "What rules?" Chen Pinggan said, "If Fairy drives the boat, the guest will tip you with a small coin as a gift." The female cultivator of Hibernation Manor was confused. Liu Jiqing nodded and tossed her a small coin. With a ding-dong, the coin floated in front of her. Liu Jiqing said, "I was rude in the past." Liu Jiqing walked forward slowly. "Another 1,000 steps and we'll reach the Jade Cliff's bamboo spring." Chen Pinggan looked around. "I heard that Sword Immortal Liu and Spring Dew Garden bought the entire Jade Cliff." Liu Jiqing nodded. 5 grains of grain rain money, 500 years. More than 200 years have passed. Chen Pinggan turned his head and said, "Fairy, you can go back first. When the time comes, I will go to the bamboo sea myself. I know the way." The young female cultivator nodded. After hesitating for a long time, she still didn't speak, so as not to disturb the two distinguished guests. She planned to go back and have a good discussion with her master before deciding whether to accept this inexplicable small sum of money. Riding on the talisman boat that the Spring Dew Garden specially hired the Taizhen Palace to build with a large sum of money. This boat was simple and elegant in style. Moreover, when it passed by a place with slightly abundant spiritual energy, there would be poems, and Qing Ci treasured edicts that would appear on the small boat's walls. If the guest happened to come across a phrase that they liked, they could grab the words at will as if they were holding water in their hands, and then they could place them at will on the surface of the fan or on the page of a book. The words would not disappear for a long time, extremely elegant and ancient. The spring dew garden was always happy to see guests take words from the talisman boat and take them away. Previously, Song Lanxiao had introduced this matter, but Chen Pinggan didn't have the nerve to do it. Now that he was traveling with Liu Jiqing, he didn't hold back. He took 2 sentences and placed them on the surface of the folding fan, totaling 10 words. Spiritual books are hidden in the grotto heaven, growing in the jade capital. On the bluestone path with Liu Jiqing, they walked side by side towards the clear spring. Chen Pinggan opened the fan and gently waved it. The 10 words in semi-cursive script rippled like water plants. Liu Jiqing said softly, "We're here." On the jade cliff, there was a thatched pavilion. Slightly further away, there was a thatched hut with only a fence. In the pavilion, there was a tea set and a table. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a clear pond. The water was so clear that there were no fish. At the bottom of the pond, there were only sparkling and beautiful pebbles. After Chen Pinggan took a seat, he sat across from the junior grand uncle of the Golden Crow Palace. Chen Pinggan closed the folding fan and smiled. "Let's not drink tea. Sword Immortal Liu, tell me, why are you looking for me?" Liu Jiqing smiled. "Even if you don't drink, I still want to drink." Liu Jiqing drew the 2 words "True Fire" on the table with one hand. The 2 words glowed with a talisman. Soon, the strokes of the 2 words converged into a line, turning into 2 red fire dragons that coiled around the table. Then, Liu Jiqing gently waved his sleeves. Like a dragon drawing water, the spring water in the pond flew onto the table and condensed into a ball. Then, he placed a celadon teacup to one side. The spring water boiled. After a while, Liu Jiqing picked out a few tea leaves from the teapot and gently threw them into the teacup. With a flick of his finger, the boiling spring water split into a thin branch and flowed into the celadon teacup. It was exactly 70% full. Liu Jiqing raised the teacup and slowly drank the tea. Chen Pinggan said, "Give me a cup too." Liu Jiqing smiled. He picked up another teacup and poured a cup for Chen Pinggan. Then, he gently pushed the teacup in front of Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan took a sip and nodded. Sword Immortal Liu is the 2nd best tea maker I've ever seen. The first was naturally still Lu Tai. Liu Jiqing smiled. "If there's a chance, young Master Chen, you can bring that expert to my Jade Cliff for a chat." Chen Pinggan put down the teacup and asked, "Sword Immortal Liu didn't show up at the Golden Crow Palace, but you should have seen through it. Why didn't you stop my sword?" Liu Jiqing sighed. He put down the teacup that he had already raised to his mouth and gently placed it on the table. "So what if I did? A brainless fight?" Liu Jiqing shook his head. "It's meaningless. Ever since I ascended to the Golden Core stage, I've relied on the name of Liu Jiqing to travel the Golden Crow Palace. How many wrongs have I committed? It's a pity that I'm not good at managing affairs. That's why I find the thunderclouds of the Golden Crow Palace an eyesore. I find that martial nephew's Dao partner annoying. I don't like that arrogant junior like Jin Le. But I can only pretend that I don't see and don't feel annoyed." Chen Pinggan nodded. That's why Sword Immortal Liu was able to ascend to the Golden Core stage. But it's also very likely that it's why Sword Immortal Liu broke through the bottleneck of the Golden Core stage and ascended to the Nascent Soul stage. Drinking tea here can relieve one's worries, but it may not be able to truly benefit one's Dao. Liu Jiqing heard this and smiled. He picked up the teacup again and took a sip. Then, he said, "You should have seen my sword in the Yellow Wind Valley of the Baoxiang Kingdom. Among the many Golden Core sword cultivators in the southern part of the North Continent, my strength is not weak." Chen Pinggan recalled the last sword in the Yellow Wind Valley. The sword radiance fell from the sky. It was Liu Jiqing's sword that injured the core of the yellow-robed ancestor. Even though the yellow-robed ancestor knew that the sword cultivators of the Golden Crow Palace were far away, he still wanted to eat his fill and replenish his demon core with human flesh and soul, even though he knew that the eminent monks of the Baoxiang Kingdom were nearby. Liu Jiqing said slowly, "But a sword with 2 blades is a big trouble. I've always pursued the principle of sword of no return, so when I sharpen my sword and train my Taoist heart, It was very easy for me when I was in a low realm. When I was in a low realm, I benefited the most from it. But later, it became more and more troublesome. Other than escorting the juniors of Gold Crow Palace down the mountain to practice swordsmanship and coming here to drink tea, I almost never left the mountain. As a result, the hope of breaking through the realm became more and more slim. Liu Jiqing said slowly, I've killed 2 of them with 1 sword. One of them should have died several times, while the other one could die or not. Later on, I felt more and more bored. Except for escorting the juniors of Gold Crow Palace down the mountain to practice swordsmanship and coming here to drink tea, I almost never left the mountain. As a result, the hope of breaking through the realm became more and more slim. Chen Pingan remained silent as this involved other people's great Tao. He just drank his tea. The tea contained the essence of water. For Liu Jiqing, whose qi dwelling was as strong as a river or a lake, this little bit of spiritual qi was insignificant. However, for Chen Pingan, a cultivator in the lower 5 realms, every cup of tea was like a timely rain on a parched field. The more, the better. Liu Jiqing asked seriously, that's why I invited you to drink tea. I want to know why you wielded that sword outside the Gold Crow Palace. How did you do it? 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 Even if it's just a sliver of understanding, it's still worth a fortune to me at my current bottleneck. Chen Pingan raised his cup of tea and asked with a smile, what if I say that I've enlightened you? Sword Immortal Liu, you yourself said that it's a bountiful harvest that can't be bought with money. Then, you're going to dismiss me with a cup of tea? Liu Jiqing smiled and said, you said that you wanted to drink more tea. Other than the spiritual qi in the tea, you also wanted to see my unique technique of drawing talismans. Does this count as repayment? Chen Pingan shook his head and said, I can't understand the true meaning of a sword immortal at the bottleneck of the Gold Core realm in such a short period of time. Also, you can't do it more than 3 times. If you can't understand it, then forget it. Liu Jiqing laughed. He raised his hand and pointed at the clear pool and steep cliff. He said, if you can understand it, I'll give you the remaining 300 years of jade lustrous cliff. How about that? When the time comes, you can use it to brew tea for your guests or rent it to Spring Dew Garden or anyone else. It's all up to you. Chen Pingan opened his folding fan and gently fanned himself. Then, I'll have to trouble Sword Immortal Liu to give me another cup of tea. Let's have a nice chat over tea. When doing business, we have to first determine the character of both parties. Then, everything can be discussed. Liu Jiqing smiled knowingly. After that, one of them spoke with the ripples of the Heart Lake while the other used the martial arts method of condensing sound to form a line. They began to do business. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, that person stretched out his hand and asked for another cup of tea. Liu Jiqing said with a straight face, Brother, can you show some sincerity? Chen Pingan said seriously, every word is true. Every word is sincere. Liu Jiqing waved his sleeve. Forgive me for not seeing you off. Chen Pingan thought for a while and waved his fan with one hand while the other hand swept across the table. He grabbed some spring water from the boiling spring water on the table and poured 2 drops of spring water in front of himself. Then, he drew a straight line with these 2 points. He gently touched one end with his fingertip and slowly wiped the line to the right until he reached the other end. Let's not look at the big picture. Let's assume that this line is the small world where Sword Immortal Liu lives. Then, Sword Immortal Liu is a cultivator born and raised in the Jinwu Palace. His temperament is here. While the Jinwu Palace has the temperament of sword cultivators, the temperament of sword cultivators is here. Here and here, they are constantly drifting away from your temperament. More sword cultivators, such as the tyrannical wife of the palace master and the domineering sword cultivator Jin Le, are gathered at the other end. But Sword Immortal Liu, who cultivates in the Jinwu Palace, will feel that everything is an eyesore. Although your realm and seniority are high enough and you can protect your own temperament, you will still stop here. Because Sword Immortal Liu wholeheartedly cultivates the sword and ascends to the top, He wants to sharpen and clean his sword with earth immortal cultivators. He is too lazy to care about the trivial matters under his nose. He feels that it is a waste of time and sloppiness, right? Liu Jiqing nodded slightly and sat upright. That's right. Chen Pinggan raised his finger again and pointed at the end that symbolized Liu Jiqing's temperament. He suddenly asked, when it comes to sword drawing, why do you give up what is near and seek what is far away? Between those who can defeat others and those who win by themselves, the foot of the mountain admires the former, but the mountain admires the latter more, right? Sword cultivators have great killing power and are known as the best in the world. Then, do we still need to examine the heart and cultivate the heart? Do the sword cultivators flying sword and saber, as well as the master who controls them, have to be pure and untainted in both physical and mental aspects? Chen Pinggan withdrew his hand and gently moved the folding fan from the left end to the right end. Can you, Liu Jiqing, draw your sword along this path until your sword heart is illuminated? Liu Jiqing fell into deep thought. Chen Pinggan suddenly asked, Sword Immortal Liu, have you been living on the mountain since you were a child, or did you cultivate on the mountain when you were young? Liu Jiqing stared at the line and said softly, ever since I can remember, I have been living on the mountain of the Golden Crow Palace, following my master to cultivate. I have never cared about the mortal world. Chen Pinggan sighed and stood up. Then pretend that I didn't say anything. I can only suggest that Sword Immortal Liu go down the mountain more often and travel farther. Liu Jiqing raised his hand and gestured twice. Although I don't know much about common affairs, I can't say that I can see through people's hearts, but I still have some understanding. So, don't try to trick me with those Jianghu tricks. This spring dew garden is a gift to me, Liu Jiqing. You are obviously determined to get the jade lustrous cliff. If you sell it, you can easily double the remaining 300 years, let alone 3 grains. If you do it well, you can even get 10 grains. Sure enough, that person quickly sat back down and said with a smile, doing business with a smart person is so straightforward. Liu Jiqing raised his head and asked curiously, do you care so much about money? Why do you have to be like this? The white-robed scholar sighed. Poor mountain cultivators, it's not easy to make money. Liu Jiqing shook his head and didn't want to bother with this person's nonsense. Liu Jiqing was silent for a moment and said, you mean to say that you want to use the Golden Crow Palace as a place to cultivate your sword? The white-robed scholar said with a smile, like me, one sentence has 1,000 meanings. Sword Immortal Liu is talented and intelligent, you can figure it out yourself. Liu Jiqing looked at the straight line and muttered to himself, no matter what the result is, whether I go there to cultivate my sword or not, just this idea alone is very beneficial. Liu Jiqing raised his head and said, according to the agreement, this jade lustrous cliff is yours. Take the land deed, I will go to the spring dew garden and speak with the patriarch later. A priceless piece of golden jade paper floated down in front of Chen Pinggan. Both of them signed their signatures. Spring Dew Garden's signature was an ancient seal of the ancestral Master Hall's jade seal. Liu Jiqing's signature was a sword-like character. 200 years later, the character still contained sword intent. Chen Pinggan didn't immediately put away the land deed that was worth at least 6 grains of grain rain money. He asked with a smile, Sword Immortal Liu is so generous, I don't think that idea will be beneficial at all. It might even be a bad thing. When I do business, I have always been fair and honest. I wouldn't dare to harm a Sword Immortal with boundless killing power. Sword Immortal Liu, please take back the land deed and allow me to come here for tea without paying. Liu Jiqing's thoughts were clear. He smiled and said, after leaving the jade lustrous cliff, if I really do return to the Golden Crow Palace and cleanse my sword with people's hearts, I naturally won't use such methods. So just take the land deed. Chen Pinggan thought for a moment, then used his folding fan to draw vertical lines from top to bottom on the horizontal line on the table. The master of the Golden Crow Palace, the wife of the Mountain Lord Dau's daughter, Jin Le, the female cultivator who persuaded Jin Le not to attack me. Their backgrounds, their masters, their cultivation nodes, their experiences outside the mountain, their allies, their close friends, their beliefs, love and hatred. Liu Jiqing, are you really interested in knowing? Once you choose to cleanse your sword, you need to go straight to your heart. As a sword immortal cultivator at the bottleneck of the Aurus core realm, your natal flying sword, your cultivation base, and your master's seniority are your greatest enemies. Can you really cast them aside temporarily? If you give up halfway and can't reach the other end in one go, it will only damage your heart, causing your sword heart to be covered in dust and your sword intent to be flawed. Liu Jiqing smiled and said, I can be sure that you are not a sword immortal cultivator. You shouldn't be too clear about the hardships of cultivation and the tribulations that wear down one's will. Cleansing the sword at the Golden Crow Palace is difficult because of the numerous trivial matters and the unfathomable details of the human heart. However, at the end of the day, it's as difficult as refining the sword embryo in the earliest days. It has to be exactly the same. I'm just going through the earliest cultivation path again. If I could do it back then, what's so difficult about becoming a Aurus core sword immortal now? The white-robed scholar shook his head and smiled. The same thing can change with the passage of time, but it's difficult in two ways. Liu Jiqing thought for a moment, then smiled and nodded, I've learned something. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Sword immortal Liu, do you really believe that I'm pretending to be profound? Are you not afraid that I'll take you from the immortal mansion to the ditch at the foot of the mountain? Liu Jiqing stood up, I won't impose on you any longer. I hope that I can come here to drink tea as a guest in the future. Master is still the same. In Liu Jiqing's eyes, he was already a guest at Jade Cliff. Chen Pinggan looked at the title deed on the table, then raised his head and looked at the white-robed youth. Why does the Golden Crow Palace have a sword immortal like you? Did your ancestors accumulate good karma? Liu Jiqing smiled and said, Your words are unpleasant, but I'll take them as good words. To be honest, I'm not boasting, but the reputation of the senior cultivators of the Golden Crow Palace is indeed much better than it is now. It's a pity that reputation can't be exchanged for cultivation experience and family property. There's nothing better in this world. Therefore, I often think that my apprentice nephew is just doing things against his will, and not really doing anything wrong. Chen Pinggan stood up. How about I make another deal with you? Liu Jiqing asked, What do you mean? Chen Pinggan first asked a question, Will the cultivators of the Spring Dew Garden spy on this place? Liu Jiqing pointed at the thatched cottage outside the pavilion. Do you think my sword is just a decoration? There are some rules that need to be mentioned. For example, when I drink tea here, I always follow the rules of the Spring Dew Garden. Once in the Jammu mountain range, when I saw an enemy of the Golden Crow Palace who also wanted to attack me, I turned a blind eye. If Spring Dew Garden doesn't follow this little rule, I feel that they are asking me to draw my sword and seek death. That's best. Chen Pinggan pointed at himself. Aren't you worried about not being able to find a whetstone? Liu Jiqing looked around. Aren't you afraid that Jade Cliff will be destroyed? Now the cliff spring is yours. Chen Pinggan said, Pick a place and draw a circle. You attack with your sword and I'll attack with my fist. How about that? Liu Jiqing smiled. I'm afraid you'll die. That's exactly what I want. Chen Pinggan closed his folding fan and repeated, That's exactly what I want. There were two meanings in that one sentence. At the farewell spring banquet, the Golden Crow Palace's sword immortal, Liu Jiqing, did not appear. As for the young sword immortal who lived in Hibernation Awakening Manor, he did not appear either. This caused everyone in the Spring Dew Garden, where rumors were flying everywhere, to feel regretful. Ignoring Liu Jiqing, he was one of the top cultivators of the North Continent's southeastern coast. Although he was only at the Golden Core realm, he was young and a sword immortal. The golden signboard of the Golden Crow Palace's sword immortals was supported by Liu Jiqing alone after the death of the nascent soul sword immortal, palatial Lord Bing Jie. However, Liu Jiqing was no stranger to anyone. Both the Spring Dew Garden natives and foreign cultivators were more interested in the young sword immortal who had many stories to tell. Firstly, he had cleaved apart Golden Crow Palace's protective thunderclouds with a single strike. Rumor had it that Liu Jiqing had said it himself and it could not be faked. He had even invited the person to Jade Cliff for tea. Secondly, according to the rumors on the ferry, he had tempered his body to an extremely powerful state with his carnate sword embryo. He was in no way inferior to a Golden Body Realm warrior. He had struck the Iron Shell Manor's Grandmaster Consecrator down the ferry with a single punch. It was said that the Iron Shell Manor's young master, Wei Bai, did not deny it. He did not hide anything. Illumination Cottage's Tang Qingqing even admitted that the young sword immortal had deep ties with the Spring Dew Garden. He was old acquaintances with his father and the fairies Song Lanqiao. Thirdly, the sword immortal surnamed Chen, who stayed at the Bamboo Sea's Waking Hibernation residence, would travel between the Bamboo Sea and Jade Cliff daily. As for his relationship with Liu Jiqing, the outside world could only speculate. During this period, the Spring Dew Garden's ancestral hall held a secret meeting. After the discussion, they did not restrict the rumors and allowed them to spread. However, they began to intentionally or unintentionally conceal the young sword immortal surnamed Chen's whereabouts at the Spring Dew Garden, his true appearance, as well as the details of the ferry incident. They began to create misunderstandings. Rumors spread throughout the Jiamu mountain range. One day, it was said that he had stayed at Guyu's residence. The next day, it was said that he had moved to Lichuan residence. The day after, it was said that he had gone to Illumination Cottage for tea. After the farewell spring feast ended, even more ferries left Talisman Water Crossing. The cultivators returned home. Spring Dew Garden's Golden Core cultivator, Song Lanqiao, also boarded the ferry that had already made a round trip to Skeleton Beach. However, on the Jiamu mountain range's Laohui Street, there was a small shop. The shopkeeper had changed and it quietly reopened for business. The shopkeeper was a young man in a green robe. A vermilion wine pot hung from his waist and he held a folding fan in his hand. He sat on a small bamboo chair by the door. He did not advertise his business, but rather basked in the sun. Those who were willing to take the bait were hooked. On the bustling Laohui Street, every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Cultivators bustled to and fro. The palm-sized shop paid a large sum of money to the Spring Dew Garden every year. This small shop hung with a signboard that read Bayan. Inside, there were all sorts of miscellaneous items from the mountain and the foot of the mountain. However, each item was placed neatly on the shelves. On the counter of the shop, there was a note cut from Xian paper with the words "No bargaining" written on it. The top and bottom of the note were held down by two seals as paperweights. Apart from this, each shelf had a piece of paper posted on it. The paper was filled with the names and prices of the goods being sold. The shop was divided into the inner and outer parts. However, the shop at the back had its doors tightly shut. There was also a piece of paper posted on it: "The treasure of the shop, the fated will obtain it." The words were as large as fists. If one was willing to look carefully, they would discover that next to the words "the fated will obtain it," there were also 4 tiny characters that seemed to be side notes: "The highest bidder will obtain it." After all, it was a shop that could be opened on Laohui Street. The price was hard to say, but the quality of the goods was guaranteed. What's more, it was a newly opened shop. According to common sense, it was bound to take out some good things to attract people's attention. On Laohui Street, there were several long-established shops with powerful mountain gates. They all had 1 or 2 magic treasures as the treasure of the shop for people to visit. There was no need to buy them. After all, there were easily more than 10 grain rain coins. How many people would be able to fork out such a thing? In fact, it was just to help the shop gain popularity. On the other hand, this Bayan shop was comparatively shabby. Apart from those pieces of sparkling white jade bones that were labeled as having come from the Skeleton Beach, which could be considered somewhat rare, and those entire sets of hard yellow paintings of the goddess from the City of Murals, which were also not bad, it always felt that they lacked a genuine treasure of the immortals that would make people remember at a glance. Most of them could only be considered as some fragmentary antiques that could be considered cheap. In addition, the smell of cosmetics was a bit too heavy. There were no less than 2 shelves of treasures, both of which were filled with what seemed to be the boudoirs of women from wealthy clans. Therefore, after 10 days, almost all of the shop's customers had become women who had heard the news and hurried over. There were young female cultivators from various mountain peaks, as well as many women from influential families within the Great Guan dynasty. They formed groups and arrived together. When they came across an item that caught their eye, they only needed to shout at the shop's entrance. If they asked the young shopkeeper if he could give them a discount, the guy on the bamboo chair would wave his hand. No matter how delicate and soft the women's tone was, it was all useless. That young shopkeeper would not budge even if thunder struck him, and he would never give them a discount. Many of the women who didn't lack gold and silver but hated the fact that they couldn't bargain with 1 or 2 copper coins were especially disappointed and annoyed. They would leave in a fit of pique. However, that young shopkeeper would at most smile and say that they were welcome to come again. He would never ask them to stay or change their minds. Over time, this small shop gained a bad reputation for being a rip-off. Unexpectedly, one day at dusk, Tang Qingqing brought a group of female cultivators from the Spring Dew Garden who had a good relationship with the Zhaoye cottage to the shop noisily. Every one of them picked an item that only caught their eye. Without bargaining, they put down the immortal coins and left. Moreover, they only shopped in this small shop on Laohui Street and stopped shopping after that. After that, the shop's business improved. What really made the shop overcrowded was that sword immortal Liu, who was even prettier than the beauties of the Golden Crow Palace, actually entered this shop and spent money. For some reason, she walked all the way with a pile of bones before leaving Laohui Street. On this day, the shop put up a closed sign. The young shopkeeper, who had neither an accountant nor a worker to help him, leaned on the counter alone and counted the immortal coins. The snow coins piled up like a mountain, and there were also a few small summer coins. A young man in white with a golden hairpin on his head stepped over the threshold and walked into the shop. He looked at the money-grubbing shopkeeper and said helplessly, "I don't understand. Do you have to be so smart to make money?" Chen Pinggan didn't even raise his head. "I've already told you, Great Sword Immortal Liu. We're just wild cultivators with no roots. Our heads are tied to our belts to make money. Immortal masters like you won't understand." Liu Jiqing shook his head. "I have to go. I've already told Patriarch Tan about the Jade Cliff, but I still hope you won't sell it. It's best if you don't rent it to others. Otherwise, I won't come to the Spring Dew Garden to fetch water and make tea." Chen Pinggan raised his head and said with a smile, "That's 6 grains of grain rain money. I can't stay in the Spring Dew Garden for long. When the time comes, I can still find a Spring Dew Garden cultivator to help me take care of the shop. I can still make money by dividing the profits. But if I don't sell or rent the Jade Cliff, what's the point of keeping the title deed? Let it eat dust and mold, and then it'll become invalid after 300 years. Liu Jiqing sighed. Chen Pinggan smiled. "Actually, it's easy to come to the Spring Dew Garden to make tea. You just have to give me 3 grains of grain rain money. For the next 300 years, you can come as you wish. Before I leave, I'll talk to the Spring Dew Garden in advance. At that time, no one will stop you." Liu Jiqing asked, "Do you think my grain rain money fell from the sky?" Chen Pinggan waved his hand. "I'm just joking with you. In the future, you can make tea whenever you want." Liu Jiqing stood still. Chen Pinggan was puzzled. "What's wrong? Do I have to spend money to invite you to tea? Isn't that too much?" Liu Jiqing was annoyed. "Where are the hundreds of pebbles at the bottom of the clear pond? Why aren't there any left? It's only worth 200 to 300 grains of snow money. Are you greedy?" Chen Pinggan slammed the table. "I have the title deed. The entire Jade Cliff is my property. I just picked up a few pebbles and put them in my pocket. What can you do about it?" Liu Jiqing said helplessly. "Then I'll buy those pebbles from you and put them back at the bottom of the Jade Cliff. How about that?" Chen Pinggan stretched out a palm. 5 grains of snow money. This shop doesn't give discounts." Liu Jiqing slammed his palm on the counter. After he raised his hand, 5 more grains of snow money appeared on the table. Liu Jiqing turned around and left. "The next time I come to the Spring Dew Garden, if there's 1 less pebble in the water, I'll chop you to death." Chen Pinggan gently pressed a finger on the counter. Otherwise, with so many grains of snow money arranged in an orderly manner, the formation would be disrupted. Another 5 grains of snow money. It was a little annoying. It was not good to be too good at doing business. Chen Pinggan felt that today was a good day to do business. He put away all the immortal coins, walked out of the counter, and took down the closed sign. He continued to sit on the small bamboo chair at the entrance of the shop, but instead of basking in the sun, he was enjoying the cool air. Of course, he didn't want to fight to the death with Liu Jiqing. It was to measure how fast the flying sword of a sword cultivator at the Golden Core realm was. In the 3 rounds, Liu Jiqing contributed 5 points, 7 points, and finally 9 points. Chen Pinggan had a rough idea. However, the young Grandmaster of the Golden Crow Palace was so angry now. It was not his fault. After all, Liu Jiqing had probably never eaten so much soil in his life. Of course, Chen Pinggan and Liu Jiqing's 3 sparring sessions were not easy for Liu Jiqing either. There wouldn't be a 4th round. Otherwise, they could only fight to the death. There was no need for that. As for why Chen Pinggan still stayed in the Spring Dew Garden after the 3 rounds of fighting, other than making some money as a burden to make room for things close to him, he still had to wait for a reply. Previously, he had sent a secret letter to Mount Mu Ishan of the Linen sect through the sword room of the Spring Dew Garden. The so-called secret letter, even if the messenger flying sword was intercepted, was just some ordinary matter for the Linen sect youth, Pang Lanshi, to send to Longquan County. Therefore, when the letter would be sent from Longquan County to the Bone Beach and then to the Spring Dew Garden, he only needed to see when that Grandmaster Tan appeared. This nascent soul Grandmaster who was in charge of the records of thousands of people in the Spring Dew Garden and the servant disciples never appeared in front of Chen Pinggan. However, as long as Mount Mu Ishan of the Linen sect really replied, no matter how calm she was, no matter how many things she had to do, she would definitely not be able to sit still. She would make a trip to the shop or the house of hibernation. In the night, Laohui Street was brightly lit. The Spring Dew Garden had some income again. Chen Pinggan stood up and planned to close the door. After that, he only needed to take out a talisman boat that he temporarily borrowed, and he could ride the wind back to the house of hibernation in the bamboo sea. As soon as Chen Pinggan picked up the bamboo chair, he put it down and looked towards the shop. A slender young woman appeared out of thin air and stood there with a smile. Chen Pinggan stepped over the threshold and cupped his fists with a smile. "Greetings, Mrs. Tan." This Spring Dew Garden owner's surname was Tan, and her first name was Ling. Other than her, the Grandmaster Hall's direct lineage masters in the Spring Dew Garden all had 3 names. For example, Jindan Song Lanqiao was of the Lan generation. Tan Ling did not stay for long. After some polite greetings, she handed over the sword box of the Linen sect's Grandmaster Hall to Chen Pinggan, and she left with a smile. The business of the Spring Dew Garden no longer needed to take risks. The Spring Dew Garden gave out a small shop on Laohui Street and a talisman boat that was the icing on the cake. The timing was just right. Chen Pinggan closed the shop and took a talisman boat to the house of hibernation in a secluded place. In the room, he opened the sword box and there were 2 flying swords. Tan Ling's Spring Dew Garden also received a flying sword message from the Linen sect, saying that it was a gift from the Mui sect's Grandmaster Hall in return for child Chen. The 2 flying swords contained in the sword box could travel 100,000 miles, and it was difficult for nascent soul cultivators to intercept them. Chen Pinggan was no stranger to the sword box. He had one himself, and the one at the Book Lake was not far away, and its quality was far inferior to this one. Sitting in the room, he opened a letter and looked at the handwriting. Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly. His first disciple had rambled on for a few thousand words in the letter. She had told her master about her studies in the school, rain or shine. She had studied diligently and meticulously. The old masters were almost moved to tears. Kui Dongshan should be the one personally handling some of the truly confidential matters. For example, regarding Ju Mili's matter, the letter vaguely said, "Your student has already understood, and it's fine now." Chen Pinggan read it a few times. Yes, Pei Qian's handwriting was getting more and more neat. He really did not copy books and slack off. As for the words, "Master, my crazy demon sword art has been perfected. It's a pity that Master did not go home to take a look. I earned a small mountain of silver for the shop. Master, you should go home and take a look. If the silver grew legs and ran away, I won't be able to stop it, although Master, I have lost dozens of soldiers, but I have taken in 2 protectors." Every household in the dragon-riding alley does not pick up lost things. Master, you can rest assured. Short Winter Melon is very obedient in the shop, but he is a rice bucket. He is not good at earning money, so I have to take out my private savings to pay for his food expenses. Now that I have mastered the peerless sword art, saber art, and fist art, even if someone bullies me, I will not argue with them. However, I will definitely protect Short Winter Melon well, because he is the weakling that master mentioned. I am no longer one of them. Chen Pingan smiled as he put away the letter. He gently folded it and slowly stored it in his square kun object. Chen Pingan had already taken off his golden wine and snowflake robes. He was only wearing a green robe and a wine pot. He got up and went to the corridor. He looked at the distance high above the courtyard wall. The sea of bamboo was dense, and the world was verdant. After Kui Dongshan rushed back to Longquan County, he ate in the dragon-riding alley. The main seat at the dining table was always empty. Kui Dongshan wanted to sit there, but after arguing with Pei Qian for a long time, he could only sit opposite Pei Qian. The little water monster Ju Mili sat beside Pei Qian. As long as Sharu sat down, she would always sit on the bench with her back facing the door. Moreover, she did not need to eat at all. In the past, she would accompany Pei Qian to chat, but today, she did not dare to not come. During the meal, Sharu just made up the number and symbolically ate a few times. The other three wolfed down the food like a whirlwind. Especially Ju Mili, her chopsticks were flying. After that, Kui Dongshan left the dragon-riding alley shop, saying that he was going to Luo Po Mountain to drink some wine. Pei Qian did not care about him. He practiced a set of crazy demon sword technique in the courtyard. Ju Mili clapped vigorously at the side. Kui Dongshan did not directly go to Luo Po Mountain bamboo house. Instead, he appeared at the foot of the mountain. Now, he had a decent mansion. In the courtyard, Wei Pai, Zhu Lian, and the stooped man guarding the door were playing chess. Wei Pai and Zhu Lian were playing chess. Zheng Dafeng was eating melon seeds at the side and pointing out the rivers and mountains. Kui Dongshan sat on the wall and watched for a long time. He could not help but curse, 3 stinky chess pieces in a pile. It's so spicy that it blinds my eyes. Kui Dongshan floated over. However, when he sat down, Wei Pai and Zhu Lian picked up the chess pieces and put them back into the chess pot. Kui Dongshan stretched out his hands. Don't. It's not funny when children play chess. Zheng Dafeng began to chase them away. Wei Pai directly returned to Cloud-Splitting Mountain. Zhu Lian and Kui Dongshan climbed the mountain together. Kui Dongshan waved his sleeves like an old hen flapping its wings. He flapped his wings and flew up 3 steps at a time. Kui Dongshan asked casually, "Did Jiang Shong really come to Luo Po Mountain?" Zhu Lian smiled, "You're talking about Brother Ju Fei? He came and said he wanted to be our Luo Po Mountain's consecrator as a nascent soul realm cultivator." Kui Dongshan sneered, "You agreed." Zhu Lian put his hands behind his back and turned his head with a smile. "Guess?" Kui Dongshan waved his sleeves. "Yo, Zhu Lian, you've improved, haven't you?" Zhu Lian smiled, "Don't hit my face. The rest is up to you." Kui Dongshan hovered in the air, less than a foot off the ground. He glanced at Zhu Lian. Jiang Shong is not simple. Zun Yuan is not simple either. Zhu Lian smiled, "That's why I rejected him. This guy's flattery skills are not good. He needs to cultivate properly. He can't enter Luo Po Mountain for the time being." Brother Ju Fei also felt that this was reasonable. He said he would study it when he returned and ask me for advice next time. Only then did Kui Dongshan land. He continued to flap his 2 snow-white wings and slowly flew up. "That unpolished Jade Realm Sword cultivator Li Cai?" Zhu Lian nodded. "Brother Ju Fei is very talented. It's just that I feel that everything is a bit off. This is probably the only flaw. It's the same when it comes to flattery and dealing with women. That Li Cai couldn't stand Brother Da Feng's gaze and wanted to attack. I couldn't stop him, so that person from Bamboo House gave him half a punch. With Brother Ju Fei's persuasion, he finally stopped." Kui Dongshan's face was gloomy. Now that he was in charge of the south, He really didn't know much about the north. Zhu Lian smiled. When one's family grows big, it's common for people from all walks of life to have different temperaments. Kui Dongshan sneered. Isn't it because you're not skilled enough and your fist technique is not good enough? Zhu Lian said helplessly. I'm holding back my fist intent even when I'm peeing and shitting. What else do you want me to do? Kui Dongshan landed on the ground and began to climb up the mountain. He said casually, Lu Baixiang has already begun to fight for territory. Zhu Lian put his hands behind his back and bent over to climb up the mountain. He said with a mischievous smile, "He's the same as Wei Xian. A wolf travels 1,000 miles to eat meat, a dog travels 10,000 miles to eat shit." Kui Dongshan suddenly stopped. I won't go up the mountain. Tell Wei Pai to send a flying sword message to that linen sect's Mu Yishan. Ask him about that Jiao Cheng's birth characters, hometown, genealogy, ancestral grave, anything. Just tell him whatever he knows. The more the better. If the entire linen sect is useless, then it's fine. But let Wei Pai tell the linen sect one last thing from the bottom of his heart. There's no such thing as making money while doing nothing. Zhu Lian asked, Wei Pai was right in front of you before. Why didn't you say anything? Kui Dongshan smiled. If you say it, you'll owe him a favor. Zhu Lian nodded. Makes sense. Kui Dongshan no longer climbed the mountain. He turned into a rainbow and returned to the small town. Now that blacksmith Wan was not in Longquan County, he could come and go freely. Under the dim light of night, Kui Dongshan went to the heavily guarded old porcelain mountain and left with a large sack on his back. Then he stayed for a few days at the ancestral house where he had stayed before. Nobody knew what he was doing every day. Even when Pei Qian went, Kui Dongshan did not open the door. Pei Qian took Zhu Mili to climb up the house. After climbing up, they found that there was a courtyard. Unfortunately, when they looked down, it was foggy and they could not see anything. Pei Qian had to take Zhu Mili back to the dragon riding alley. That day, Kui Dongshan swaggered to the shop and happened to meet Pei Qian and Zhu Mili who were running down the stairs. When they reached the yard, Pei Qian contacted the crazy demon swordsmanship and asked, Today, someone wants to bully the short man again. What should we do? Kui Dongshan smiled. If we can hide, we can hide. What else can we do? It's not like we can beat them to death with a stick. Pei Qian stopped the walking stick in his hand. Zhu Mili quickly moved a small stool over. After Pei Qian sat down, Zhu Mili squatted at the side and her teeth chattered. Pei Qian let go of the walking stick and frowned. What's wrong with the old teachers? Do they only teach the principles of words in books? Who doesn't know how to recite books? Speaking of this, Pei Qian raised his chin. Right, Guardian. It's time for you to take action. Zhu Mili had a tacit understanding and helped her senior sister to say the rest of the words. What's the use? Kui Dongshan smiled and said, When you see someone you don't like, it's only natural that you don't like everything in your life. When you don't like everything in your life, it's natural that you don't like people. Pei Qian was furious. Are you talking about me? Kui Dongshan held the back of his head with both hands and leaned back. He raised his feet and swayed gently, but he did not fall down. How could I be talking about you? I'm explaining why I asked you to avoid these people. Don't get close to them. They are like water ghosts. They will drag you down. Kui Dongshan, who was swinging there, raised one hand and pretended to be holding a folding fan. He gently shook his wrist. Pei Qian asked, Why did you give your favorite fan to my master? Kui Dongshan did not stop moving. I have a lot of fans. I just gave my favorite one to you. Pei Qian whispered, What are you doing in that house? Don't tell me they're stealing or moving things. Kui Dongshan closed his eyes and slept. Pei Qian made a gesture and took Zhu Mili to the left and right side of Kui Dongshan. He was lying horizontally but did not fall down. Zhu Mili stretched out a hand to cover her mouth. Senior sister, he is really asleep. Pei Qian rolled her eyes. After thinking for a while, she waved her hand and motioned to go back to the house with her to copy books. After that, Kui Dongshan quietly left the Riding Dragon Alley and Longquan Commandery. However, Pei Qian felt a bit strange. In the school in Longquan Commandery opened by the Chen family in Longwei Creek, The old masters who had always lived in seclusion actually began to visit the children's homes. They were not allowed to leave the houses in the streets and alleys. For example, the shop in the Riding Dragon Alley where she worked also had an old master who talked with Shrew for a long time. In the end, they even had a meal together. Not only that, the teachers who originally only imparted moral knowledge and explained the sage books in the school also helped out in the fields, went up the mountain to chop firewood, and took the students to tour the dragon kill and so on. In private, there seemed to be teachers who complained that these were vulgar acts that disgraced the refined culture. However, they only complained about it verbally and did what they should do. Not long after, this school quietly dismissed several teachers, and several new teachers came. A young man in white who walked all the way south had long been away from Dali. One day, he held the moon in his hand by a stream in the forest. He looked down at the moon in his hand and drank some water. He smiled and said, "I can't keep the moon, but I can drink water." Then he shook his sleeve and a small porcelain doll more than a foot high fell out from his snow-white sleeve. There were countless cracks on the doll's limbs, and its face had not been opened. Compared to the porcelain doll that appeared in the old house that year, it was just a lot worse, but its technique was actually more skillful. Kui Dongshan turned his head and looked. He stretched out his hand and gently stroked the porcelain doll's small head. He smiled and said, "Am I right, Brother Gao?" 5:15. Chen Pingan walked out of the house of waking hibernation. Holding the green mountain walking stick that complemented the bamboo forest, he walked to the top of the bamboo forest alone. After hesitating for a while, he took out the talisman boat and rode the wind towards the jade cliff. Actually, when he was at the spring dew garden, other than borrowing the talisman boat temporarily, the maidservant in the mansion laughed and said that the House of Waking Hibernation had a bag of celestial money prepared for the talisman boat to and from the mansion and Laohui Street. However, Chen Pingan never opened it. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Following the rules was one thing, but he also had his own rules. As long as the two did not oppose each other, the cage of rules would become a talisman boat that could help people explore the mountains and rivers. When Chen Pingan rowed the talisman boat made by the Taishan Palace of the Daoist talisman branch to the Jade Cliff, he saw Liu Jiqing taking off his boots and rolling up his sleeves and pants. He stood in the stream below the clear pond and was bending down to pick up pebbles. When he saw one that he liked, he did not even raise his head and accurately threw it into the clear pond at the edge of the cliff. After Chen Pingan landed and kept the talisman boat in his sleeve, Liu Jiqing still did not raise his head. He walked barefoot all the way downstream and said in an unfriendly tone, "Shut up. I don't want to hear you talk." It was most likely that this Grand Marshal uncle of the Jinwu Palace did not believe that the moneygrubber would put a few hundred pebbles back into the clear pond. As for the bigger reason, Liu Jiqing was a little strict when it came to matters. He wanted everything to be perfect. He should have returned to the Jinwu Palace long ago, but halfway there, he felt that the clear pond was empty. He was upset and decided to return to the Jade Cliff. He had already said goodbye to the man surnamed Chen at the shop on Laohui Street. Since he could not force the moneygrubber to put the pebbles back, Liu Jiqing had to do it himself and pick up as many pebbles as he could. Chen Pingan also took off his boots and walked into the stream. He had just picked up a sparkling and cute pebble and wanted to help throw it into the clear pond. Unexpectedly, Liu Jiqing said, "That one won't do. It's too beautiful." Chen Pingan still threw it into the clear pond at the bottom of the cliff, but Liu Jiqing waved his sleeve and threw the pebble into the stream. Liu Jiqing said angrily, "Chen, fine. My good intentions are treated as ill liver and lungs." Chen grabbed the pebble and rubbed his hands to wipe the water stain. He exhaled, smiled, and kept the pebble. "It's all real gold and silver. Pressure, it's really pressure." The clear pool at the bottom of the Jade Cliff was the source of the spring water. It was the intersection of the mountain roots and the river veins. It was blessed by nature and full of spiritual aura. The stones at the bottom of the clear pool were of the best quality. They had been soaked in the spiritual aura of the clear spring water for thousands of years. The stones in the stream were slightly inferior. However, If they were used to carve seals or handpieces similar to muttonfat jade, they could be used to decorate and caress. As a high-ranking official and dignitary's study, they were still of the best quality. If there was such a thing in the study room, it would be very pleasing to the eyes. Although it might not be able to prolong one's life, it was enough to make one feel relaxed and happy. Liu Jiqing was very meticulous in his selection. He threw dozens of pebbles into the clear pond from the stream. It felt like he was more meticulous than choosing a wife or a Taoist companion. Chen Pinggan followed behind Liu Jiqing and picked up the pebbles. Liu Jiqing picked up most of the pebbles and put them down after a while. As a result, another 40 to 50 pebbles came into his account. Chen Pinggan had already made up his mind. There was an old shop on Laohui Street that specialized in selling stationery. He could forget about the old shopkeeper because he could not afford to hire him. Moreover, the shopkeeper might not be interested in these pebbles. Chen Pinggan only needed to find 1 or 2 apprentices in the shop. Even if they only had half of the old shopkeeper's skills, it would be more than enough to deal with these pebbles. He would ask them to carve the pebbles, or handpieces, or small inkstones. When the time came, he would put them in his shop and say that they were from the old pit on the Jade Cliff. He would then tell a story about how Liu Zhenxian of the Jinwu Palace comprehended the sword by looking at the pebbles. The price would then rise. As for the pebbles at the bottom of the clear pond, he still had to put them all back. If he wanted to do business for a long time, the word shrewdness would always come after honesty. After all, he, who had obtained a shop in the Springdew Garden, could no longer be considered a real bag shop. As for why the Springdew Garden's ancestral hall would give him a shop, it was very simple. The old nanny from the Iron Cliff Manor who looked like she could ward off evil had already pointed out the secret. The small book Spring Dew in Winter did indeed need to be written with sword immortal Chen Pinggan. However, when Song Lanxiao mentioned this matter, he clearly said that the Springdew Garden's penman would first publish the new edition of Spring Dew in Winter before Chen Pinggan left the Springdew Garden. He would first hand over the contents of the new edition of Spring Dew in Winter to Chen Pinggan so that he could review what could be written and what could not be written. In fact, the Springdew Garden already had a well-thought-out plan. After doing business on the mountain for so many years, they were very clear about the taboos of immortals. Chen Pinggan enjoyed these methods of making money and did not feel bored in the slightest. At that time, he chatted with Song Lanxiao very enthusiastically. After all, in the future, he could also apply what he had learned in Luorpa Mountain. Liu Jiqing went ashore and walked towards the Jade Cliff. He saw that the fellow had no intention of going ashore. It seemed that he planned to search the stream again to avoid missing anything. Liu Jiqing was so angry that he laughed and said, "Good man, you're thinking about money, aren't you?" Chen Pinggan bent down and picked up a cobblestone that was as fine as black jade. He gently turned it over to see if there were any pleasing natural lines. He laughed and said, "When I was young, I was afraid of being poor. What can I do?" The reason why Liu Jiqing did not leave the Springdew Garden on his sword was naturally that he wanted to see with his own eyes that the fellow put the stones back to their original places. Only then would he feel at ease. However, Liu Jiqing now suspected that the fellow would immediately put the stones back after he left. He always felt that the fellow with the surname Chen would really do such a crazy thing. Chen Pinggan kept the stones that looked like black jade close to him. His gaze wandered. Picking up money from the ground was much easier than taking money from other people's pockets and putting it into his own money pouch. If he did not bend down and stretch out his hand, Chen Pinggan was afraid that he would be struck by lightning. Because of Chen Pinggan, it took Liu Jiqing a full hour to walk back to the Jade Cliff. The two of them arrived at the thatched pavilion. Chen Pinggan stood still while Liu Jiqing stared at him. Chen Pinggan patted his head and said, "Look at my memory." He waved his sleeve and hundreds of cobblestones fell into the clear pool like rain. Liu Jiqing stared at the stones attentively. The number was about the same. The key was that none of the cobblestones that he liked the most were missing. Only then did Liu Jiqing's expression improve. If one of them was missing, he felt that he would not need to come here to drink tea anymore. Whether he was a moneygrubber or not, that was his own business. It was his ability to earn money from him. However, If he did not keep his promise, it would be a world of difference. Since the Jade Cliff had fallen into the hands of this kind of person, Liu Jiqing would treat it as if the Jade Cliff had been destroyed. Chen Pinggan patted his sleeve and said, "Have you ever thought that picking up stones in the stream is also cultivating the mind? I have a general understanding of your temperament. You like to pursue perfection. This kind of state of mind and temperament may be a good thing to practice the sword, but on the path of cultivating the mind, using the people of the Golden Crow Temple to wash the sword, you will most likely be very upset. Therefore, I am actually regretting telling you about the meridians." Liu Jiqing shook his head and said, "The more troublesome it is, the more it means that once the sword is washed successfully, the harvest will be greater than I imagined." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "I just found a random reason to give you a reminder." Liu Jiqing hesitated for a moment, then sat down and began to draw seals with his fingers. However, this time, his movements were slow and he did not deliberately conceal his ripples of spiritual energy. Soon, 2 scarlet fire dragons circled around him. He raised his head and asked, "Have you learned it?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "I have memorized the method. I can also roughly see the path of spiritual energy circulation, but I can't do it now." Liu Jiqing frowned and said, "If you were willing to spend half of your mind on business on cultivation, would you be in such a miserable state?" Chen Pinggan smiled bitterly and said, "Liu Jiqing, don't just sit here and talk. I am a person who has broken the bridge of longevity. It is already very good for me to be in such a state today." Chen Pinggan knew about Liu Jiqing's character in the previous 3 rounds. He had agreed that Liu Jiqing, a sword practitioner at the bottleneck of the Aurus Elixir realm, would only use half of his strength. He would only use his fist. Chen Pinggan drew a circle with a radius of 100 feet and used the cultivation level he had when he was in Old Dragon City to deal with Liu Jiqing's flying sword. This was Liu Jiqing's first time using a flying sword. Because he had underestimated Chen Pinggan's toughness and was not used to his opponent's style of exchanging injuries for injuries and punching him twice, the flying sword, which was originally named Waterfall, was only used to determine victory and defeat, not life and death. Therefore, when Liu Jiqing's flying sword first appeared, although it was as fast as a waterfall pouring down from the heavens, it still only pierced an inch above Chen Pinggan's heart. As a result, Liu Jiqing's flying sword pierced through his shoulder and arrived in front of Liu Jiqing in the blink of an eye. The extremely fast flying sword once again rotated back and pierced that person's ankle. Liu Jiqing had just moved a few feet away when that person followed him like a shadow and punched him out of the circle. Fortunately, that person had deliberately held back his strength after punching him. However, Liu Jiqing still fell to the ground and slid back several feet, covered in dust. Liu Jiqing was just a little embarrassed. After floating up, he looked at the guy whose shoulder and ankle were indeed pierced by the flying sword and asked, "Doesn't it hurt?" Sword practitioners were difficult to deal with. Once they pierced through the opponent's body and chi residence, the most difficult thing to deal with was that it was extremely difficult to heal quickly. Moreover, it had a terrifying effect similar to the conflict of the Great Tao. Other offensive magic weapons in the world could also inflict lasting damage and even cause endless consequences. However, they were not as difficult to deal with as the residual sword aura. It was rapid and fierce, like an instant flood breaking through a dam. It was like a dragon entering the small world of the human body, overturning the rivers and seas, and greatly affecting the circulation of the chi residence's spiritual chi. When cultivators fought with their lives on the line, a disturbance of the spiritual chi would often be fatal. Moreover, ordinary chi cultivators who tempered their bodies were ultimately not as good as military cultivators and pure martial artists. If one sword was already like this, what would happen if there were more sword practitioners? At that time, the opponent laughed and said, "It doesn't affect my punches." After the second round, Liu Jiqing began to be careful of the distance between them. It should be known that sword practitioners, especially Earth Immortal sword practitioners, were very good at both long-range and close combat. Chen Pinggan began to fight with the cultivation level he had when he first arrived at the Skeleton Beach, in order to avoid the elusive Liu Jiqing's natal flying sword. After that round, the two of them sat cross-legged outside the circle. Chen Pinggan's body was covered with small wounds, and Liu Jiqing was also covered in dust. At that time, Chen Pinggan could not help but ask, I once fought with the flying sword of an old Jindan sword practitioner. How could you be so fast when you only used 70% of your strength? Liu Jiqing was in a bad mood at that time. It's only 70%. It's up to you to believe it or not. On the third day, Liu Jiqing looked at the guy who seemed to be completely fine. You're not pretending? Today, I used 90% of my strength. Although you and I agreed not to fight to the death, but... Before Liu Jiqing could finish, the guy laughed and said, just use your sword. Chen Pinggan used the cultivation level he had after withstanding the heavenly tribulation of the Cloud Sea, but he did not use some of his trump cards to fight with the enemy again. In the end, Liu Jiqing stood outside the circle and had to rub his red and swollen cheeks with his hands, using his spirit qi to slowly disperse the bruises. Chen Pinggan stood in the line of the circle, smiling brightly. There were a few more bloody holes on his body, but they were not fatal anyway. He just needed to recuperate for a while. Liu Jiqing had to ask the same question again. Is it really not painful? Chen Pinggan blinked. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.